A resounding boom rang out as the vast expanse of golden swordlight passed through the surrounding mist, then came crashing down upon the heavy water true axis like a waterfall. A string of loud clangs rang out in rapid succession overhead, and Han Li immediately made a hand seal, upon which a vast expanse of black light erupted out of the axis, alongside several dozen bursts of heavy water, which intertwined in midair to form an enormous heavy water vortex. Upon falling into the vortex, all of the golden sword light was shredded into pieces without being able to put up any resistance. All of a sudden, the heavy water true axis shrank down to the size of a normal shield at Han Li's behest, then flew through the air as a long streak of black light, hurtling directly toward one of the wooden puppets. The puppet remained still on the spot as it raised its sword to defend itself against the heavy water true axis, and right as the two were about to clash, Han Li suddenly curled a finger upward, upon which the heavy water true axis circled around in midair, avoiding the puppet's sword before striking it on the head. A loud thump rang out as the puppet's head exploded amid an eruption of black light, and its headless body instantly fell away to the side, as if it had been sapped of all of its strength. Meanwhile, the golden longsword in its hand flew toward the mountain summit as a bright streak of light, as if it had been summoned. The other puppets paid no heed to this at all, as they continued to come after Han Li and Lu Yuking with their swords raised. "We can't afford to waste any more time here." Han Li's brows were tightly furrowed as he made a beckoning motion, and the heavy water true axis instantly flew back to him before hovering above the palm of his hand, where it revolved incessantly. At the same time, the mantra-treasured axis in his body began to revolve in reverse, and he abruptly shot through the air as a blurry shadow. A string of afterimages suddenly flashed over the stone staircase, then abruptly drew to a halt. Immediately thereafter, a string of explosions rang out as 4 of the 6 remaining puppets fell to the ground, having been decapitated. Their longswords also flew toward the mountain summit, as if they had been sucked away by some type of invisible force. Meanwhile, Han Li took a moment to steady himself, and his complexion was looking a little pale. His breathing was also a little labored, and his heavy water true axis was gradually slowing down in its revolution. Simultaneously using the mantra-treasured axis, and the heavy water true axis was extremely taxing on his immortal spiritual power, and at his current cultivation base, he couldn't keep this up for long. Lu Yuking was still locked in battle against a pair of puppets, and she was rather taken aback to see both of them being decapitated in the blink of an eye. Right at this moment, a burst of thunderous rumbling suddenly rang out from the mountain summit, and the entire mountain began to tremble violently. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he cast his gaze upward. "There's no time to waste, Brother Han. Leave me here and go retrieve your flying swords. I'll be able to look after myself," Lu Yuking suddenly said. Han Li hesitated momentarily upon hearing this, then nodded in response. "All right, make sure to be careful." After that, he sprang up the ladder once again, and it didn't take long before he vanished into the dense mist up above. In the wake of Han Li's departure, the 2 remaining puppets immediately tried to give chase, only for Lu Yuking to appear in front of them in a flash. At this moment, there was a rather peculiar look on her face, one that she had never adopted before. She appeared a little cold and distant, but also rather confused and disoriented, while a hint of moisture had appeared in her eyes. With a flick of her wrist, she stowed the azure feather fan away, and it was replaced by a silver longsword that was clearly a treasure of a far inferior caliber to the azure fan. She looked down at the longsword in her hand as she murmured to herself, "Why does it suddenly feel like using a sword isn't so bad?" This wasn't said in a joking manner. Instead, she seemed to be genuinely confused, as if she didn't know herself why she suddenly wanted to use the sword. "Ali," After emerging from the area enshrouded within the dense mist, everything in front of Han Li immediately cleared up, and only then did he discover that he was still situated halfway up the mountain. There was still no end in sight to the stone staircase, but as Han Li continued to scale the staircase, he encountered no further obstructions. Upon reaching the top, Han Li made his way along a bluestone mountain path toward the center of the mountain summit, and he spotted what appeared to be a Taoist temple from afar, concealed behind a green bamboo forest. The Taoist temple wasn't very large, and there were all types of designs engraved onto its white walls and black tiled roof, giving it a rather intricate appearance. Han Li naturally had no time to appreciate the scenery right now, and after verifying that there weren't any restrictions in the Taoist temple, he pushed its black gate open before making his way directly inside. The Taoist temple was barely furnished at all. The first two of its 3 courtyards was comprised of around a dozen halls, most of which were empty, while the rest only had some unidentifiable deity statues inside. There were also 2 halls that appeared to be pill refinement chambers with pill cauldrons placed inside, while the shelves on the walls were lined with containers of different sizes. Han Li had no time to verify whether the contents of the containers could still be used, so he simply stowed everything away with a sweep of his sleeve. The final courtyard of the Taoist temple was quite far away from the first 2, and down the center was a wide path paved with white stone slabs. Han Li made his way down the path before arriving in front of a large hall. There were 7 or 8 wooden puppets that were identical to the ones that he had encountered earlier strewn over the ground outside the hall's entrance. Han Li swept his gaze over his surroundings, and he quickly noticed that the wooden frames of the hall's doors and windows were all engraved with complex runes, clearly indicating that there was a formidable defensive restriction set up here. However, the restriction had already been severely damaged, and there were wisps of residual sword chi present in many of the important points on the formation, indicating that the damage had been inflicted not long ago. There was a huge black plaque hanging directly above the center of the hall's entrance, upon which was inscribed the words "Ancestral Hall" in flowing golden characters. Despite the shared name, the ancestral halls of cultivating sects and those of the mortal world were actually very different. The ancestral halls of the mortal world were generally used to worship the memorial tablets of deceased ancestors. However, cultivators of the immortal realm led extremely long lives, so aside from a select few memorial tablets, the ancestral halls of the cultivating sects mostly contained treasures left behind by ancestors and founders. These treasures weren't necessarily extremely powerful. Instead, most of them were personal treasures that these ancestors and founders liked to keep with them during their cultivation journeys. These treasures had the closest ties with the sect, and as a result, it gradually turned into a tradition for treasures of this nature to be kept in the ancestral halls. An ancestral hall was the heart of a sect's lineage, and it was often the center of a sect's fortune. There were many stories of treasures being kept in ancestral halls that became nurtured by the fortune of a sect over time, thereby attaining sentience on their own. A very fortunate sect disciple could be chosen by one such sentient treasure while engaging in worship at the ancestral hall, and that would often be the beginning of a meteoric rise. The furnishings in the Boundless Sword sect's ancestral hall were very simplistic. There were 2 rows of eternal flame lamps in the hall, the flames in which had, ironically, already burned out. Down the center of the hall between the 2 rows of lamps were 4 worship tables standing on platforms of ascending heights. If we take each tier as one generation, that means that the Boundless Sword sect's heritage only lasted 4 generations. Han Li was initially rather surprised by this observation, but it then quickly made sense to him, considering the sect's method of disciple recruitment. Han Li swept his gaze over the hall to find that aside from worship tables on the second and third tiers, which had several memorial tablets placed on them in a haphazard fashion, the remaining two tables only held some sandalwood platters, all of which were completely empty. Han Li's gaze lingered momentarily on the worship table, on the highest tier, to find that there was no memorial tablet for the boundless Taoist there. It looks like the boundless Taoist was still alive when the boundless sword sect fell. Right as Han Li was inspecting his surroundings, a crisp and pleasant chime suddenly rang out from the rear of the ancestral hall. The sound wasn't very loud, but it was remarkably penetrative, traveling all the way here, and Han Li was able to hear it clearly even though he hadn't been listening out for it. He immediately left the ancestral hall, then made his way toward the mountain behind the hall along a small bluestone path. After walking for a few minutes, Han Li arrived on a downward-sloping hill. Standing before him was a black rock that was only half the height of a grown man. It was a rather unremarkable structure, and it bore the words Sword Sea inscribed in antiquated text. Han Li stood on the edge of the hill as he cast his gaze downward, and he spotted a glimmer of light in a meadow down below. He took a closer look, and a stunned look instantly appeared on his face. As it turned out, there were countless flying swords plunged into the vibrant meadow down below. All of the swords had their tips pointing up at the sky, and they were swaying gently like blades of grass in the light breeze, gently tapping against each other to produce the pleasant chiming sound that Han Li had heard earlier. Among these flying swords were tiny ones that were as thin as sewing needles, enormous ones that were as wide as city gates, squiggly ones that resembled winding snakes, straight ones with parallel edges. Every type of longsword that one could think of could be found here. They had been in this sword sea for countless years, yet not a single one of them was displaying any signs of damage or rust, and all of them were radiating dazzling spiritual light. Han Li's gaze roamed over the sea of swords for a moment before his eyes finally settled on a spot in the meadow, where he spotted his 72 azure bamboo cloud-swarm swords arranged in a uniform line, swaying gently alongside all of the other flying swords. When he tried to summon them back to his side, the azure bamboo cloud-swarm swords immediately began to sway in a more urgent and erratic fashion, as if they were trying to heed his call, but were also locked into place by some type of suppressive force. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li raised a hand, and a section of his sleeve flew off on its own, enveloped in a layer of gentle azure light. The piece of sleeve drifted past the black rock and entered the sword sea, upon which barely visible streaks of light instantly flashed through the air around it. In the blink of an eye, that sliver of sleeve was shredded into dust in complete silence. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. Right at this moment, a burst of thunderous rumbling suddenly rang out in the sky. Han Li looked up to find a single white cloud with a golden lining in the air above the sea of swords. Atop the cloud sat a massive white stone altar that was octagonal in shape with 8 giant golden pillars around it, each of which was several hundred feet tall. There were extremely lifelike coiling golden dragons engraved onto the pillars, presenting a breathtaking sight to behold. Han Li was just about to fly up to the cloud for a closer inspection when another burst of rumbling suddenly rang out from the altar, following which a flash of red light shot out of the cloud. Immediately thereafter, a ball of crimson flames abruptly surged out of the center of the cloud, and the entire cloud instantly took on a bright crimson hue, as if it had been set alight. At the same time, a sea of crimson flames had also appeared beneath the white stone altar, illuminating the entire sky a bright red color. With the clouds scattered, Han Li spotted a thin and stocky middle-aged man standing on the floating altar, and it was none other than Chung Shan. At this moment, there was a solemn look on his face, and his arms were raised to heavens as he chanted an incantation. Hovering above his head was a large black metal plate that had a slight bulge in the center that was identical in appearance to the beveled metal scriptures awarded to officials in mortal empires. On and upon it was inscribed the words, "Uniting all swords." As Chung Shan continued to chant his incantation, the flames beneath the altar began to burn brighter and brighter, and waves of heat that were visible even to the naked eye began to surge through the air, causing the surrounding space to warp and shimmer. All of the countless flying swords in the meadow were also beginning to sway much more violently, clanging against one another much more forcefully than before. Han Li was initially a little perplexed upon seeing this, but he then quickly realized what was happening. The so-called thousand-edged spirit-gathering sword formation that Chung Shan had painstakingly created back in the Blaze Dragon Dao had most likely been a formation that he had learned from the Boundless Sword sect. And this was Sea of Swords had to have been the true spirit-gathering sword formation. The Sea of Swords served as the foundation, the hovering altar was the cauldron, and the metal scripture filled the role of the catalyst, allowing Chung Shan to draw upon the spirit of all of the countless flying swords here. It was truly an extremely ambitious endeavor. Right at this moment, a thunderous roar rang out from the altar up above, causing the entire area to rumble incessantly. All of a sudden, the entire mountain had begun trembling, and all of the sword chi in the meadow erupted into the heavens. From Han Li's perspective, it appeared as if a gust of gentle wind had blown through the Sea of Swords, and all of the lush grass in the meadow was instantly severed before being shredded into countless pieces by the sword chi in the air. At the same time, all of the swaying flying swords had become completely still, standing straight like soldiers ready for battle with their tips pointed up at the heavens. On the altar, Chung Shan took a deep breath, then suddenly swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a golden flying sword that circled around momentarily in midair before hovering beneath the metal scripture. Chung Shan then joined the index and middle fingers of his right hand together, and a burst of golden light emerged over his fingertips as he swept them through the air, creating a golden rune that was around 10 feet in size. The giant rune fell upon the metal scripture in a flash, and the latter immediately let loose an exultant ringing sound. Immediately thereafter, a series of thin lines began to appear over the entire metal scripture, and they connected together before radiating dazzling golden light. An incredibly thick pillar of golden light erupted out of the metal scripture straight up into the heavens, then exploded high up in the sky like a firework, forming a dazzling golden light barrier with countless projections surging over its surface. There was a giant deity clad in golden armor wielding a massive blade capable of splitting mountains. There was a wraith-like masked assassin wielding a sword as thin as sewing needles, plucking out the heart of an enemy general. There was a gorgeous celestial maiden wielding a sword as elegant and free-flowing as her dress. There was a thin elderly man with a long beard directing the vast expanse of sword chi around him. All types of sword-wielding figures were depicted in these projections, and Han Li was staring at the unfolding scene with his brows tightly furrowed in concentration. Specks of golden light began to appear in his pupils, and in the next instant, he felt as if had become completely immersed in what he was witnessing. He felt as if he had become another figure on the golden light barrier, wielding his 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords to conjure up one sword lotus flower after another. At the same time, a change suddenly began to take place in the sea of fire beneath the floating altar. The surging flames twisted around to form a massive fiery vortex, while then began to release bursts of formidable suction force. All of the flying swords in the meadow down below immediately began to tremble and sway, then rose up into the air as if they had been summoned, hurtling toward the fiery vortex as a wave of flying swords. The sky above the meadow instantly became extremely chaotic as a result, with sword light of all colors shooting in all directions, slicing the entire space to ribbons. The invisible sword chi in the air was also no longer restricted to the meadow, beginning to spread in all directions instead. The sound of tearing fabric rang out as Han Li's robes were brushed by some of the spreading sword chi, and a pair of extremely long gashes had been torn into the fabric. Han Li paid no heed to this as he remained still and looked up at the sky. In the heavens above, over 1,000 flying swords had surged into the fiery vortex, and they were instantly scorched a bright red color while giving off a miserable wailing sound. Balls of light of all types of different colors began to fly out of the swords, and those were none other than their sword essence. The flying swords that were stripped of their sword essence quickly dimmed before being refined into puddles of molten liquid that quickly vanished into the flames. The capacity of the fiery vortex was limited, only able to take in fewer than 2,000 swords at a time. Han Li's azure bamboo cloud swarm swords were situated closer to the back, so it was going to take some time before they were drawn into the vortex, but it wasn't going to be a very long time. On the floating altar, Chung Shan's brows were tightly furrowed as he murmured to himself, "I'll deal with you once I'm done refining my sword." He had already noticed Han Li's arrival, but he had been too busy working the formation to do anything about it. There was a hollow area on the floating platform in front of him, and at this moment, balls of sword essence were emerging from that area before hovering in midair. Chung Shan was ecstatic to see this, and made a peculiar hand seal with both hands before pointing a finger at the metal scripture. The golden patterns on the metal scripture instantly flashed before releasing a vast expanse of golden light to envelop the golden longsword down below, forming a golden vortex upon it. As soon as the vortex took shape, all of the sword essence hovering above the altar was instantly drawn to it before surging into Chung Shan's bonded flying sword in a frenzy. The golden longsword began to tremble and ring, while radiating halos of golden light. While the sword essence was being absorbed on the altar, the fiery vortex down below was constantly drawing in more flying swords, and the azure bamboo cloud swarm swords was getting closer and closer to the vortex. Right at this moment, Han Li abruptly shuddered, and the golden light in his eyes gradually faded, replaced by a layer of blue light. "What a formidable formation!" Han Li exclaimed to himself as a hint of elation appeared on his face. The scenes depicted on the golden light barrier were very similar in nature to the myriad sword artwork that he had obtained in the past, but this formation was clearly far more profound, and it could even be said that the myriad sword scroll was most likely a replica of this formation. While viewing the formation, Han Li had actually intentionally opened himself up so that he would become immersed in it. Otherwise, given his current level of spiritual sense, there was no way that he would have completely lost himself just now. Thanks to the complete immersion that he had opened himself up to, not only had he gained a deeper understanding of all sword formations, he had also identified the key points in this formation and the way that it operated. On the altar, Chung Shan's expression changed drastically at the sight of Han Li suddenly snapping back to his senses, and he exclaimed, "Impossible!" It was no wonder that he was so shocked. Back when he first witnessed this formation, he had been completely immersed in it for 7 days and 7 nights, and it was only through a stroke of luck that he was able to awaken. He had managed to learn the thousand-edged spirit-gathering sword formation from that experience, but his spiritual sense had been severely damaged, so he had no choice but to leave this area, and only after so many years had passed did he get another opportunity to come here. Chung Shan gritted his teeth in fury as he thrust both palms forward, pushing the balls of sword essence with his immortal spiritual power, so that they would surge into his bonded flying sword at an even faster rate. All of the flying swords in the sky twisted together before flowing incessantly into the fiery vortex, and at this point, Han Li's azure bamboo cloud swarm swords were no more than 1,000 feet away from the fire. He immediately stomped a foot down onto the ground upon seeing this, and the entire mountain shuddered violently beneath his feet as he launched himself up into the sky. However, he had only just risen up into the air when a burst of asphyxiating pressure crashed down upon him from all directions, forcing him back down onto the ground. At the same time, gusts of ferocious wind were sweeping through the air all around him, interspersed with countless streaks of sword chi that tore a series of gashes into his robes. Han Li let loose a defiant roar as all of his profound acupoints lit up with blue light, and his true extreme film emerged over his body to keep all of the sword chi at bay. The pressure weighing down upon him had slammed his body so heavily back, down onto the ground that his legs had sunk deep into the earth. Han Li looked up into the sky to find that Chung Shan was standing on the edge of the altar, controlling the metal scripture with one hand, while reaching out toward the sea of swords down below with his other hand. At the same time, he was glowering intently at Han Li, with fury and resentment in his eyes. Only now had he realized that Li Feiyu was the one who had foiled his sword formation all those years ago, the so-called #1 sword cultivator of Heavenly South. This is the work of karma. You took my sword essence and spoiled my sword formation, but looks what's happened now. Everything is still mine in the end. Chung Shan chortled with glee, and his voice rumbled across the sky like thunder. He had made many enemies in order to gather so many spirit swords for his 1,000-edge spirit-gathering sword formation. Yet all of his efforts had been for naught thanks to Han Li. He had been made the laughingstock of the entire Blaze Dragon Dao for years over this matter, so how could he not be ecstatic to exact his vengeance now? If you hadn't tried to refine my bonded flying swords, I wouldn't have foiled your sword formation. You and I are both from the Blaze Dragon Dao and the Transient Guild, and we've worked together multiple times in the past, so how about we let bygones be bygones, and you let me recover my bonded flying swords, Han Li proposed. His voice wasn't very loud, but it was able to pierce through all of the layers of obstruction like a sharp sword to travel into Chung Shan's ears. Shut your mouth. You've treated me like a fool this entire time. While it's true that I gradually came to realize your involvement in foiling my plans, there was no good opportunity to strike, so I continued to bide my time. But now that you've presented yourself to me on a silver platter, I'm going to refine both you and your bonded flying swords into my unmatched immortal sword. Chung Shan harumphed coldly. If you're not willing to resolve this matter peacefully, then don't blame me for taking you down by force, Han Li said in a cold voice. What a joke! Your death is imminent, yet you're still spouting nonsense. Chung Shan scoffed, but for some reason he couldn't help but shudder internally in the face of Han Li's threat. All of a sudden, Han Li let loose a thunderous roar, and his body rapidly swelled to over 1,000 feet tall, while tufts of golden fur appeared over his skin as he took on his giant mountain ape form. He then stomped down viciously onto the ground, launching himself up into the sky in the face of the layers of sword chi above. As it drew close to the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords, the giant golden ape reached out with a thick and muscular arm, and a layer of golden scales appeared over its fur as it lashed out at the stream of swords flowing toward the fiery vortex. A resounding boom rang out, and the entire stream of swords curved outward amid a chorus of chaotic clangs. All of a sudden, all of the flying swords that were hurtling toward the fiery vortex were knocked off their original trajectory, and that included the 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords. Immediately thereafter, the giant golden ape reverted back to its human form, and a pair of translucent wings abruptly appeared on Han Li's back as he twisted around, changing direction in midair to fly directly toward his bonded flying swords. However, before he had a chance to get close, a burst of invisible force erupted out of the entire sword formation, gathering all of the flying swords and dragging them back on course to flow into the fiery vortex. "I'm not letting you get your way a second time," Chung Shan declared in a cold voice. As soon as his voice trailed off, he made a string of hand seals before pointing a finger at the metal scripture that was hovering in the air before him. A drop of blood essence that was glowing with golden light flew out of his fingertip before falling upon the metal scripture, and the golden patterns on its surface instantly shuddered, following which a burst of faint red mist rose up and surged into the golden light barrier up above. A resounding boom rang out as the golden light barrier in the sky exploded violently, but all of the projections on it lingered, falling into the sword formation like a storm of golden rain. With each projection that flew into the formation, a sword would diverge from the stream of sword before falling into the grasp of the golden projection and flying toward Han Li. Han Li was just about to try something else to forcibly recover his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords when he suddenly felt a shadow loom over him. He immediately flapped his thunderstorm wings, flying back several dozen feet through the surrounding sword chi with great difficulty. A giant sword that was as wide as a city gate came crashing down from above, just barely glancing past Han Li as it slashed down with tremendous power. Han Li immediately raised a fist before giving the broad side of the sword's blade a vicious punch, and a giant azure fist projection instantly erupted upon the massive sword, causing it to tremble violently. The golden giant that was holding the sword also shuddered violently from the immense force that was transferred through the sword, and it disintegrated into countless specks of golden light. However, before Han Li had a chance to withdraw his fist, another golden figure wielding an extremely long sword charged directly at him. Behind this golden figure were countless more, including a gorgeous woman, a burly man clad in a suit of golden armor, an elderly man with a long beard, a small child. Waves upon waves of sword-wielding figures were converging toward him once. Han Li remained calm and collected as he took a stride forward, and his mantra-treasured axis appeared behind him amid a flash of radiant golden light. All of the projections and flying swords that entered the range of the ripples released by the mantra-treasured axis instantly came to a standstill, and Han Li was able to casually make his way past them, as if he were taking a stroll in the park. All of the swords that were pierced toward him had become his stepping stones, allowing him to progress steadily toward the altar. It had already become clear to him that if he didn't defeat Chung Shan, then he would continue to use the power of the sword formation to prevent him from retrieving his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords. Once enough time elapsed, the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords would inevitably be destroyed. Chung Shan was astonished to see this from the altar, and he looked on in shock as Han Li approached the altar from afar. However, he then quickly composed himself and gritted his teeth tightly as he made his way back to the center of the formation, where he cast a series of incantation seals into the hollow area before him. Immediately thereafter, he spread a hand open, and 5 longan-sized golden beads dropped into the hollow area at once to fall into the sea of fire down below. All of the flames below instantly began to sway violently, as if a fierce gust of wind were blowing through them, and the fire was spread in all directions. Han Li cast his gaze toward the flames to see 5 balls of golden light emerge within it, drawing in all of the surrounding fire to form 5 menacing draconic heads, all of which were turned to face him. As soon as the draconic heads took shape, a thin jet of fire instantly shot out of each of their nostrils, and their eyes also lit up with radiant golden light, making it appear as if they were actual living creatures. In the next instant, an animalistic roar rang out from within the sea of fire, and 5 fiery dragons that were as thick as water vats flew out, twisting around in midair before pouncing at Han Li with tremendous power. Waves of scorching heat erupted forth in all directions, causing the entire space to warp and shimmer, to the point that even the golden ripples released by the mantra-treasured axis had begun to warp, thereby significantly shrinking their effective area. In the face of the oncoming fiery dragons, Han Li raised a hand before sweeping it through the air, and his heavy water true axis flew out of his sleeve, then swelled to the size of a millstone while revolving rapidly as it positioned itself in front of him. At the same time, the water Dao runes on its surface began to glow radiantly as it released bursts of heavy water, which converged to form a huge heavy water vortex that surged toward the 5 fiery dragons. The 5 fiery dragons opened their cavernous mouths, and there was molten lava bubbling inside while releasing plumes of black smoke, making them resemble 5 volcanoes that were on the verge of eruption. Immediately thereafter, a burst of thunderous rumbling rang out as vast torrents of lava and fiery rocks came pouring out of the 5 dragons' mouths down upon the heavy water true axis. A string of deafening booms rang out as the entire sky was illuminated bright red. As the ferocious storm of fire crashed down onto the heavy water true axis, enormous black waves were instantly raised, and even though the axis was able to hold its own, it was clearly struggling under the formidable barrage. Han Li's arms were raised aloft, and his entire body was trembling uncontrollably, indicating that he was clearly also struggling to keep the assault at bay. All of a sudden, he let loose a thunderous roar, and instead of retreating, he thrust his palms forcefully against his heavy water true axis, which instantly released an enormous wave of black heavy water that swept toward the 5 fiery dragons in retaliation. The fiery dragons also swooped down from above, and a clash of tremendous power took place as fire and water intertwined with one another, causing a cloud of white mist to rise up into the sky. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly declared, all-encompassing black wave. A burst of earth-shattering instantly rang out in the sky above the floating altar, and a bolt of white lightning flashed past, tearing an enormous black gash into the heavens. What seemed like an infinite volume of heavy water surged out of the black rift, forming a gargantuan black waterfall that came crashing down from above. Chung Shan could only stare up at the heavens with his eyes wide with despair and incredulity. How was it possible that a true immortal could be capable of wielding such incredible power? However, at this point, it was already far too late to try and call a truce. With that in mind, he could only grit his teeth as he swept his sleeves through the air, releasing one incantation seal after another into the metal scripture. The golden light radiating from the metal scripture immediately began to flash while releasing a string of golden runes, which fell upon the 8 golden pillars around the formation. The golden pillars instantly began to glow radiantly, and the 8 golden dragons coiled around the pillars raised their heads as beams of crimson light shot out of their eyes, then converged directly above the altar to form a crimson light barrier that was riddled with draconic patterns, just in time to oppose the vast torrent of heavy water that was crashing down from above. A burst of thunderous rumbling rang out incessantly as the crimson light barrier trembled violently, quivering under the weight of the black waterfall. Situated directly under the enormous torrent of heavy water, Chung Shan could see the black waterfall crashing down onto the crimson light barrier, and he could also clearly sense the tremendous pressure that was weighing down the light barrier from above. A series of massive indentations had appeared all over the crimson light barrier in the face of the heavy water torrent's immeasurable weight, and the golden draconic patterns on it were also flashing incessantly, indicating that the light barrier wasn't going to be able to withstand the assault for much longer. Chung Shan's brows were tightly furrowed as he took a glance at the metal scripture that was hovering in midair, and he made a beckoning motion to draw it back into his grasp. He then extended his index finger, and a burst of golden light flashed over his fingertip, resulting in a tiny bleeding gash. Using his finger as a brush and his blood as ink, he began to quickly inscribe a peculiar dark red rune onto the metal scripture. As soon as the rune took shape, the golden patterns on the metal scripture began to take on a bright red hue, resembling a system of blood vessels and meridians. Chung Shan held the metal scripture in both hands as a determined look appeared on his face, and he brought the metal scripture to his own chest like a breastplate. Red and black light flashed over his chest, and the metal scripture vanished into his body in a flash, fusing as one with him. The metal scripture was serving as the core of the entire formation, and with its disappearance, the formation instantly ceased to operate. The sea of fire beneath the floating altar subsided, gradually reverting back into a scorching fiery cloud, while the crimson light barrier up above also disintegrated into a vast expanse of translucent red light. All of the golden projections up above also vanished, but the flying swords that had been drawn toward the formation didn't descend back down onto the meadow. Instead, they continued to hover in midair, remaining locked into place by a burst of invisible force. The black waterfall in the sky was nothing more than an illusion conjured up by Han Li's mantra domain, and it had also faded away, restoring heaven and earth to their original state. Without the obstruction posed by the golden projections and the fiery dragons, Han Li was able to ascend into the heavens at a rapid speed, and in the blink of an eye, he had already fallen upon the floating altar. He cast his gaze toward Chung Shan to find that the latter's entire body had been encased in a suit of black scale armor, and there was also a layer of crimson light around him. The layer of crimson light was formed by countless wisps of extremely pure sword chi that were so incredibly sharp that even the space around them had been completely shredded, and even the golden ripples released by Han Li's mantra-treasured axis were unable to infiltrate them. To think that you would use such a precious treasure in such a suboptimal fashion, don't you think this is a massive waste? Han Li asked with a forlorn shake of his head. It's fine. I'm only using up some of the sword chi within it. As long as I can kill you, it'll all be worth it, Chung Shan replied as he strode over to the center of the altar, where he grabbed onto the hilt of his golden longsword. As soon as his hand closed around his longsword, the dark red patterns on his suit of black armor instantly lit up, and the layer of crimson light around his body surged forth to encompass his bonded flying sword as well. His aura remained at the late true immortal stage, but it had become indescribably sharp, as if he had transformed into a peerlessly sharp immortal sword. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this, but he remained unfazed. Instead of immediately lashing out at Han Li, Chung Shan said in an unhurried manner, "There's something that I've never been able to wrap my head around. How were you able to control my thousand-edged spirit-gathering sword formation back then? Could it be that you're the heir to some side branch of the Boundless Sword Sect? Didn't the Boundless Sword Sect disappear over 1,000,000 years ago? How could I be a side branch heir of the sect?" Han Li asked with a puzzled expression. "So you're not a member of the sect. No matter, you've shown yourself to be worthy of facing me," Chung Shan said as a hint of disappointment flashed through his eyes, following which he launched himself directly at Han Li with his longsword pointed forward. Han Li immediately drifted up into the air, and even after retreating all the way to the edge of the altar, he still showed no sign of stopping as he continued to fly back in retreat. A burst of dark red light flashed over Chung Shan's longsword, and a streak of crimson sword light erupted out of its tip, instantly covering a distance of over 1,000 feet. Only upon reaching within several feet of Han Li's chest was the streak of crimson sword light finally slowed down by the golden ripples released by his mantra-treasured axis. Han Li took advantage of this opportunity to retreat several dozen feet further before stopping again. The streak of crimson sword light then slowly disintegrated as he looked on with a hint of lingering fear in his eyes. If he hadn't retreated in a timely fashion just now, that sword strike would have definitely been fast enough to counteract the mantra-treasured axis's time-slow effect and pierce straight through his chest. If only all of the time Dao runes were recovered. As this thought flashed through Han Li's mind, he swooped down toward all of the flying swords that were hovering midair. However, before he was able to reach his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords, he felt a burst of formidable sword chi sweeping toward him from behind, and a chill immediately ran down his spine. He hurriedly reversed his mantra-treasured axis before dodging to the right, thereby allowing him to evade the attack. A streak of crimson light flew past him in a flash before piercing straight into the vast formation of flying swords up ahead, and a string of sharp clangs rang out as several dozen flying swords were shattered by the streak of sword light. Finally, Han Li was able to pounce on this opportunity to arrive beside his 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords. He reached out to grab onto one of them before tugging on it with all his might, only to find that it remained completely unmoved, seemingly locked into place by some type of tremendous force. Before he had a chance to do anything, Chung Shan arrived on the scene, then slashed his longsword viciously through the air. However, Han Li paid no heed to the attack as he continued to hold tightly onto the hilt of his flying sword, while injecting a wisp of his spiritual sense into it. The sword in his grasp abruptly shuddered before letting loose a crisp ringing sound, as if it were elated to have had its spiritual connection with Han Li restored. At the same time, a longsword that was enveloped in a layer of crimson light swept through the air toward the back of his neck. The dozen or so active time Dao runes on Han Li's mantra-treasured axis lit up in unison, and the golden ripples radiating from the axis took on a slightly more substantial form. However, the oncoming longsword was able to largely ignore the mantra-treasured axis's time-slowing effect, thanks to the formidable sword chi that it was enshrouded within, and the sword wasn't slowed down to a sufficient degree for Han Li to evade the attack. In this dire situation, Han Li's heavy water true axis flew onto the scene as a streak of black light, positioning itself in the path of Chung Shan's sword like a giant black shield. A sharp clang rang out as Chung Shan's longsword pierced straight through the black light around the heavy water true axis before striking the axis itself. The heavy water true axis shuddered violently as a large section of the black light radiating from it was shredded by the sword chi erupting out of Chung Shan's sword, inflicting a deep sword mark onto its surface. Han Li could sense the power of that sword strike through his spiritual connection with his heavy water true axis, and he was greatly alarmed. He immediately pulled out the azure bamboo cloudswarm sword that he had grabbed onto, and at the same time, blue light flashed within his eyes as he released 71 wisps of spiritual sense at once, with each one entering one of the remaining 71 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords. At this point, Chung Shan had already made his way around the heavy water true axis and was slashing his sword at Han Li from his right. This time, Han Li didn't take any evasive measures. Instead, he met Chung Shan directly retaliating with his own azure bamboo cloudswarm sword. The two swords clashed, and a layer of dark red sword light erupted out of Chung Shan's bonded flying sword, immediately following which a burst of golden lightning erupted out of Han Li's azure bamboo cloudswarm sword as well. The dark red sword light glanced over Han Li's sword-wielding arm, instantly slicing through his sleeve, but thankfully, his true extreme film remained resolute, so he didn't sustain any injuries. However, the sword chi imbued within the swordlight was extremely penetrative, and it felt as if it were slicing over the bones in his arm, causing him to wince in pain. He ignored the pain as he made a beckoning motion with his other hand, and the heavy water true axis behind him immediately shrank down to the size of a normal shield before hurtling directly toward Chung Shan. The armor on Chung Shan's arm flashed with black light, scattering the divine devilbane lightning released by the azure bamboo cloudswarm sword, following which the blade of the sword made direct contact with the armor itself. At the same time, the heavy water true axis crashed into Chung Shan's longsword, and the impact sent him flying back over 100 feet. Right at this moment, Han Li made a hand seal before pointing a finger forward, and all of the remaining 71 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords flew out in unison, alongside the sword in Han Li's grasp, hurtling directly toward Chung Shan as a wave of azure light. As the flying swords raced through the air, countless streaks of azure swordlight intertwined and converged in the same spot to form a massive ball of azure light. As it approached Chung Shan, a thunderous draconic roar suddenly erupted out of the ball of azure light, ringing out across the entire sky. Immediately thereafter, the giant ball of light exploded violently, and an azure-coiled dragon sprang out from within with tremendous force before swallowing Chung Shan whole. At the same time, Han Li reversed his mantra-treasured axis while simultaneously summoning his heavy water true axis back to him as he sprang forward in pursuit. He was flying through the air far faster than the azure dragon sword formation, and upon catching up to the head of the dragon, he focused his gaze downward, upon which a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. As it turned out, Chung Shan was standing in the dragon's maw in a relaxed and composed manner, and there were hundreds of streaks of swordlight attempting to pierce into his body, but his suit of black armor was keeping him completely unscathed. Han Li gave a cold harumph upon seeing this, and he sped directly toward the azure-coiled dragon, leaving a string of afterimages in his wake. His heavy water true axis was revolving rapidly over the palm of his hand as it swept toward Chung Shan, who let loose a thunderous roar as a burst of dark red swordlight erupted out of his suit of black armor, instantly destroying the azure-coiled dragon around him. He then raised an arm and swung his longsword heavily down onto the heavy water true axis, and a sharp clang rang out as the azure dragon sword formation reverted back into 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords that were scattered in all directions, while Chung Shan flew back over 1,000 feet before steadying himself. "Are you trying to compete with me to see who has more swords?" he scoffed with a mocking sneer. As soon as his voice trailed off, he tossed the longsword in his hand forward, then made a peculiar hand seal and chanted an incantation before sweeping his sleeves through the air. All of the dark red patterns on his suit of black armor lit up once again, and an antiquated rune appeared on his breastplate. As soon as that rune emerged, a vast and primordial aura instantly began to emanate out of Chung Shan's body. A sense of foreboding welled up in Han Li's heart upon seeing this, and he hurriedly contacted Taoist Zai with his spiritual sense, telling it to prepare to intervene when necessary. All of a sudden, the entire sky had become deathly silent, and even the sound of the wind had been stifled. However, a burst of metallic screeching then suddenly rang out, breaking the silence in a very abrupt and disruptive fashion. Han Li looked down to find that all of the swords on the meadow down below had begun moving again, and every single sword was enveloped in a layer of dark red swordlight, coming together to form what resembled a giant primordial beast that was only just beginning to awaken. "Let's see you deal with all these swords at once," Chung Shan roared with a furious expression, and all of the swords instantly surged through the air at his behest like a swarm of all-encompassing locusts. Han Li's expression instantly changed slightly upon seeing this. Such a vast barrage of swords coupled with such formidable swordlight was a combination that was clearly too powerful for either his mantra-treasured axis or heavy water true axis to oppose. With that in mind, the only feasible course of action for him was to run. His sole objective for coming here was just to recover his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords, and now that the objective had been achieved, There was no point in continuing this battle. Chung Shan was most definitely going to become a sworn enemy of his after this encounter, but that was something for him to worry about another time. After making up his mind, Han Li immediately withdrew all of his treasures before making a hand seal, and a golden lightning formation quickly took shape around him. In order to conjure up the lightning formation as quickly as possible, he had directly used his divine Devilbane lightning rather than drawing upon the power of the lightning bird. But even so, he was still too slow. A streak of dark red sword light came slashing down from above, and the golden lightning formation had only just taken shape before it was destroyed. Immediately thereafter, Han Li was instantly inundated by countless flying swords of all types of descriptions. His expression changed slightly upon seeing this, but he remained calm and composed as a streak of silver light flew out of his sleeve, transforming into a silver bell that rose up into the air above him while swaying incessantly from side to side. A series of dense silver halos spread through the air in all directions, proliferating outward to encompass an area that was several hundred feet in size. At the same time, he opened his mouth to release the 7 bright star rings, which connected together with one another in a flash to form an even larger ring above his head. Radiant starlight erupted out of the 7 bright star rings, forming a starlight barrier with countless star designs flashing on its surface, protecting him alongside the waves of silver ripples. He had only just managed to summon these 2 treasures when the torrential wave of swords was already upon him, and in the blink of an eye, he was enveloped by swords from all directions. The silver bell was chiming incessantly, yet the silver ripples that it was releasing continued to be worn down little by little, reducing the size of the safe area around Han Li. The starlight barrier released by the 7 bright star rings was also screeching incessantly, as one speck of starlight was snuffed out after another. Han Li's brows were tightly furrowed as he swept both sleeves through the air, and his heavy water true axis and mantra treasured axis emerged on either side of him in unison. He then made a hand seal before thrusting a palm into his heavy water true axis, and the black light on its surface shuddered, while a vast torrent of heavy water erupted out of its water Dao runes, forming a black water dragon that surged into the wave of countless swords. The heavy water dragon was enormous, and it resembled a vast river flowing through the sky, quickly blasting an opening into the vast expanse of swords. Han Li immediately flew toward that opening, while Chung Shan looked on with a cold sneer on his face. "What's the point? Your struggles are futile." Immediately thereafter, he wiped a hand over his own face, and the palm of his hand was instantly stained red. There was a price that had to be paid for forcibly drawing upon the power of the metal scripture, and he was already beginning to bleed out of all of his orifices, but in his eyes, it would all be worth it if he could kill Han Li and recover those 72 swords. All of a sudden, Chung Shan let loose a thunderous roar, and all of the swords on either side of the opening that Han Li had created instantly converged at his behest, closing in around Han Li like a pair of impregnable walls. The dark red light on the 2 walls of swords was becoming denser and denser, and Han Li wasn't even able to fly 1,000 feet before the sword formation up ahead had already come together again, and the heavy water dragon was also destroyed under the immense pressure, disintegrating into droplets of heavy water that flowed back into the heavy water true axis. This was an even more dire situation than before, and his silver bell and 7 bright star rings weren't going to be able to afford him much more protection. It wasn't going to be long before these 2 treasures would also crumble under the pressure. A string of faint cracks rang out from above Han Li's head, and a layer of hairline cracks had already appeared on the starlight barrier above, clearly indicating that it wasn't going to be able to hold itself together for much longer. Han Li made a beckoning motion upon seeing this, and the starry light barrier faded, while the 7 bright star rings flew back to him. At the same time, the silver bell also shuddered slightly before circling around in midair and flying back to him as well. In the next instant, purplish-golden light erupted out of his entire body alongside a layer of purplish-golden scales, and 2 additional sets of heads and arms emerged from his body. Immediately thereafter, Han Li drew his heavy water true axis back to himself, grabbing onto it with one hand like a shield, while also clasping each of his other 5 hands around an azure bamboo cloud swarm sword. He was also channeling the Xuanwu bloodline that he hadn't used in a very long time, forming a suit of dark green armor with antiquated runes all over its surface to protect his midsection. Han Li's physical prowess had always been his forte, and in his current form, his physical constitution was no less resilient than many defensive spirit treasures. His mantra-treasured axis flew back into his body, then immediately began to spin in reverse, and instead of continuing to adopt passive defense, Han Li went on the attack, flying straight into the torrent of swords. He was moving as fast as lightning, traversing through the sea of swords while leaving a string of blurry afterimages in his wake, and he was constantly swinging his 5 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords with tremendous power, releasing formidable bolts of golden lightning with every single swing to scatter the nearby flying swords. Despite the vast number of swords in the formation, it was unable to strike Han Li down. However, Han Li knew that he wouldn't be able to keep this up for long. Maintaining this form over any extended period of time was simply far too taxing, and the instant that he ran out of immortal spiritual power would be the instant that spelled his demise. He wasn't flying headfirst into the oncoming torrent of swords as he had lost all sense of rationality and was charging forward out of desperation. Instead, he had done this to buy Taoist Zai some time to recover. Back when he was conjuring up the lightning teleportation formation earlier, he had already tried to call upon Taoist Zai to buy him some time, only to discover that Taoist Zai's puppet body was still recovering from the attack that it had unleashed to vanquish that copper puppet, thereby rendering it unable to help. Around 15 minutes later, Han Li was clearly beginning to slow down. The suit of azure armor around his body was already riddled with sword marks, and his 6 arms were also lined with gashes. Even with his incredibly formidable physical body, it was clear that he was nearing his limits. "Are you still not ready, Brother Zai?" Han Li yelled internally in an urgent manner. "I'm going to need a few more minutes," Taoist Zai replied through their spiritual connection. Han Li's heart sank slightly upon hearing this, but in this situation, all he could do was grit his teeth and persevere. However, Chung Shan wasn't willing to drag this out any longer, not because he had seen through Han Li's intentions, but instead because he was also not going to be able to last much longer. At this point, blood was practically gushing out of his orifices, and he was beginning to feel a little faint from the blood loss. He shook his head vigorously to clear the foggy sensation in his head, and his facial features became slightly twisted as he roared, "Die!" As soon as his voice trailed off, he launched himself forward as a streak of crimson light, fusing as one with his bonded flying sword to transform into a giant streak of crimson swordlight that hurtled directly toward Han Li at an astonishing speed. The streak of crimson swordlight was extraordinarily fast, and all of the swords in its path quickly parted, forming a passageway that led straight to Han Li. Han Li's vision had been obstructed by the vast expanse of swords before him, and by the time he spotted the streak of crimson swordlight, it was already too late for him to take evasive measures. In this dire situation, he quickly channeled his spirit refinement technique before unleashing his spirit stun thorn. 1. All of a sudden, Chung Shan felt a cold harumph ring out in his mind, and a burst of sharp pain speared through the head, resulting in a split second of disorientation. The streak of oncoming crimson swordlight abruptly shuddered and drew to a halt around 10 feet away from Han Li. And this minuscule delay was enough to turn the tide of the entire battle. The mantra-treasured axis in hand, Li's body spun rapidly in reverse as he flapped his thunderstorm wings vigorously, while also drawing upon his azure Luan bird bloodline, allowing him to reach an astonishing speed as he flew to one side of the streak of crimson sword light, before piercing all 5 of his swords toward a single spot. A resounding boom rang out as the streak of crimson sword light exploded, and violent shockwaves erupted in all directions, causing Han Li to throw up a mouthful of blood as he flew back several thousand feet into the vast torrent of swords behind him. At the same time, scraps of black metal flew out of the streak of crimson sword light that had just imploded, and they converged in midair to reform the black metal scripture. A figure then stumbled out of thin air, looking deathly pale, and it was none other than Chung Shan. A huge hole had been torn through his chest, and his heart had already been completely destroyed. The dark red patterns on his body appeared to be intact, but in reality, they had already been severed into countless pieces. There was a deranged look on his face as he used his longsword as a crutch while stumbling toward the metal scripture, but with each step that he took, a chunk of flesh would fall off his body, and by the time he reached the metal scripture, only a bare skeleton of his remained. Immediately thereafter, the golden longsword in his hand also shattered into countless pieces that flew away in all directions. A streak of golden light flew out of the top of the skeleton's skull, forming a golden nascent soul with a weary look on its face. The nascent soul turned to look at Han Li, who had only just steadied himself several thousand feet away, and it murmured to itself, "Is this the design of fate?" As soon as its voice trailed off, the nascent soul also disintegrated into golden light, while Han Li looked on with mixed emotions. He didn't harbor much enmity toward Chung Shan, and they had been comrades several times in the past. If it weren't for Chung Shan's insistence on hunting him down, he would have avoided this battle entirely. With Chung Shan's demise, the sword formation in the sky instantly fell apart, and all of the flying swords suspended in the air came raining back down into the boundless sword sea. Han Li flew up into the air before drawing Chung Shan's storage bracelet into his grasp, then reached out to grab the metal scripture as well before descending onto the floating altar in the sky. He examined the metal scripture in his hand to discover that it bore the appearance of a piece of shattered chinaware. Its surface was riddled with extremely deep cracks, and it looked as if it could crumble away at any moment. A hesitant look appeared on Han Li's face as he scrutinized the metal scripture. Having gleaned the secrets of the golden light barrier from earlier, he had learned how to use this sword refinement formation, but he didn't know if the metal scripture could support the sword refinement process in its current terrible condition. After a brief moment of contemplation, he sat down with his legs crossed and set the metal scripture aside, then swallowed a pill before closing his eyes to meditate. A short while later, he rose to his feet and picked up the metal scripture again, then cast his gaze toward a certain direction as he murmured to himself, "I have to give it a try. I suppose it could be considered as completing your dying wish in your stead." With that, he tossed the metal scripture forward, and it immediately lit up as it flew back onto the altar. After that, Han Li began to chant an incantation while making a rapid string of hand seals, and the cloud beneath the altar was reignited, transforming into a sea of crimson flames once again. Ali. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the infernal frost Immortal manor, a green jade flying carriage that was around 100 feet in length was racing through the sky. At the front of the carriage stood a tall man with a disc treasure held in his hands. A layer of white mist was hovering above the treasure, and there was a speck of red light that was flashing incessantly at its center. Could those maggots from the Reincarnation Palace be responsible for this? The man murmured to himself with a perplexed expression. There was a pair of golden armored puppets standing behind him with halberds held in their hands, and they displayed no reaction. Ali. Halfway up the boundless sword sect mountain, Lu Yuking was standing with her silver longsword clasped behind her as she looked up at the mountain summit. Her vision was still obstructed by the dense mist up above, and there had been quite a loud commotion ringing out a little earlier, but it had since subsided. It seemed that whatever was taking place up there had concluded, and peace and quiet were restored. As for the wooden puppets that she had been battling, they had already been reduced to a pile of wood scraps strewn all over the ground around her. After a long hesitation, Lu Yuking finally made up her mind, setting foot onto the stone staircase to make her way up toward the mountain summit. Ali. On the floating altar, Han Li was sweating profusely as azure light surged all around him. His 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords were currently suspended above the hollow section at the center of the altar, and they seemed to have been arranged into some type of special formation, with arcs of golden lightning surging between them. Meanwhile, balls of glowing sword essence of different colors were constantly rising up and surging into the swords from the scorching flames down below. As time passed, fewer and fewer swords remained in the boundless sword sea, while the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords absorbed more and more sword essence, and the collective aura that they were releasing became more and more formidable. Han Li was observing the process intently, with bated breath. As the final batch of sword essence flowed into the 72 flying swords, a faint crack suddenly rang out up above, and Han Li's heart immediately sank slightly upon hearing this sound. Immediately thereafter, radiant golden light erupted out of the cracks on the metal scripture, and it looked as if it were about to explode. With the example set by Chung Shan earlier, Han Li was well aware of the consequences that would ensue if the metal scripture were to be destroyed, so he hurriedly swept a sleeve through the air, trying to pull the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords away from the altar before getting away. However, as soon as his immortal spiritual power came into contact with the flying swords, a burst of lightning that was interspersed with tremendous sword chi instantly erupted out of the swords to pulverize his sleeve. Immediately thereafter, a numb sensation spread through his entire body, rendering him temporarily immobilized. Right at this moment, a burst of white light suddenly flashed over his storage bracelet, following which a peculiar palm-sized jade badge flew out from within before drifting directly toward the metal scripture. Han Li was quickly able to identify the jade badge as something that had been given to him by Elder Chi Heng of the Holy Puppet Sect. During their battle all those years ago, Chi Heng had once unleashed the 7 death sword formation of the Boundless Sword Sect, and it seemed that this strange jade badge was something from the Boundless Sword Sect as well. Before Han Li had a chance to ponder this matter any further, the jade badge suddenly began to glow radiantly while becoming completely transparent, and a series of threads of golden light emerged within it to form a string of antiquated characters that read Boundless Sword Core. Following the emergence of the golden characters, the white jade badge gradually fused as one with the light radiating from the metal scripture. All of a sudden, a resounding boom rang out, and a dense dark cloud suddenly appeared out of nowhere above the altar. Azure and purple light was flashing incessantly within the dark cloud amid bursts of rumbling thunderclaps, and golden light abruptly flashed within the eyes of the golden dragons coiled around the 8 surrounding pillars, as if they had suddenly sprung to life. At the same time, they were giving off vast auras, and it seemed that they could fly out of the pillars at any moment. Immediately thereafter, the 8 dragons opened their mouths at once to blast forth streams of crimson flames toward the center of the altar, and the flames converged in midair to form a raging sea of fire. As soon as Han Li's bodily functions returned to him, he immediately flew through the air to situate himself outside the altar. Immediately thereafter, The sea of flames came surging down from the heavens, inundating the entire altar in the blink of an eye. At the same time, a resounding thunderclap rang out in the sky, and a waterfall of azure and purple lightning came crashing down, plunging straight into the scorching flames. It was impossible to see the azure bamboo cloud swarm swords through the lightning and fire, and even Han Li's spiritual sense was unable to make any inroads. Only now did the sword refinement truly begin. Han Li wore a complex expression as he sat down in midair and observed from afar. 3 days passed by in the blink of an eye, and the mouths of the 8 dragons coiled around the pillars surrounding the altars. The sea of fire that engulfed the altar had expanded even further compared with 3 days ago, and bolts of azure and purple lightning continued to rain down from the heavens into the scorching flames below. Han Li was standing near the sea of fire, and it seemed that he had already recovered from the injuries that he had sustained from the prior battle, but there was a slightly anxious look in his eyes. The sword refinement process had gone on far longer than he had anticipated, and it was completely out of his control, so all he could do was stand and wait. Fortunately, Zhu Han and the others hadn't entered this place up to this point. Inside the Taoist temple down below was Lu Yuking, who had arrived on the mountain summit some time ago. At this moment, she was casually strolling through the Taoist temple, stopping in front of a dilapidated pavilion one moment, then crouching down in front of a moss-covered well the next. She was constantly inspecting her surroundings with a slightly lost look in her eyes, and it seemed as if she were struggling to recollect something. Finally, Lu Yuking drew to a halt in front of the ancestral hall at the center of the Taoist temple. Her brows furrowed slightly as her gaze roamed over the memorial tablets before her, and she was looking a little dazed. Right at this moment, a thunderous boom rang out in the sky, and she shuddered as she instantly snapped back to her senses, then hurriedly made her way out of the Taoist temple to look up into the sky. A streak of dazzling azure light was in the process of rising up from the sea of flames up above, and it transformed into a pillar of azure light that erupted straight into the heavens. Tremendous sword chi was emanating from the pillar of azure light, stirring the sea of fire up into a frenzy, and the lightning that was crashing down from above was also thrown into a state of disarray. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this, but before he had a chance to do anything, another resounding boom rang out as yet another pillar of azure light rose up from the sea of flames while releasing extremely formidable sword chi. One pillar of azure light rose up after another in rapid succession, and a total of 72 pillars of light had emerged in the blink of an eye, all of which were giving off terrifying sword chi fluctuations. The sea of fire was snuffed out with ease by this burst of collective sword chi, revealing the white stone altar inside. The dark clouds up above were also completely scattered by the enormous sword chi in the air, while gusts of ferocious wind swept forth in all directions. Han Li wore a calm expression as he made a hand seal, conjuring up his true extreme film to protect him. As soon as the film took shape, a wave of scorching heat instantly surged over him, causing the true extreme film to crackle and flash incessantly. However, Han Li remained as still as an immovable mountain within the formidable shockwaves, and his gaze remained focused intently on the altar in an unblinking fashion. The shockwaves were so powerful that all of the greenery on the mountain summit down below was reduced to powder, and a thick layer of earth was also scraped up from the ground, producing an extremely flat area. The Taoist temple was also swept up in the shockwaves, and the restrictions around it had already been broken by Chung Shan, so it wasn't going to take long before the temple was also razed to the ground. Right at this moment, Lu Yuking summoned her azure feather fan before waving it vigorously through the air, releasing a gust of fierce azure wind that formed an azure tornado to encompass the entire Taoist temple. After traveling over such a long distance, The power of the shockwaves was already significantly diminished, but the azure tornado was still trembling incessantly. Lu Yuking's face paled slightly as she bit through the tip of her tongue, then expelled a mouthful of blood onto the azure feather fan in her hand. The fan immediately began to radiate bright spiritual light, and all of its feathers spread open like the train of a peacock, before detaching themselves from the handle of the fan and vanishing into the azure tornado in a flash. The tornado instantly swelled drastically in size while radiating bright azure light, and it became far more stable than before. The shockwaves quickly subsided, but the entire mountain continued to sway violently as countless rocks of different sizes came tumbling down in a catastrophic avalanche. Moments later, the azure tornado around the Taoist temple faded, and the temple remained completely unscathed. Lu Yuking was panting slightly, but her expression was quite calm, and she quickly swallowed a pill before looking up into the sky. At this point, the sea of fire and cascade of lightning up above had already disappeared, and all that remained in the sky was the white altar. Above the altar was a radiant ball of azure light that was several hundred feet in size, and it resembled an azure sun. An ecstatic look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he unconsciously took a step forward. Right at this moment, the azure sun exploded violently, sending rays of blinding azure light erupting in all directions. Every single ray of azure light was a peerlessly sharp streak of sword chi that howled through the air, and the white altar was instantly punched full of holes before shattering into countless pieces. The surrounding 8 pillars suffered the same fate, reduced to countless pieces of scrap metal. An alarmed look appeared on Han Li's face as he flew back in retreat while sweeping a sleeve through the air, and his heavy water true axis instantly emerged before him, then released a thick heavy water barrier to shield him. He was retreating very quickly, but he was still unable to outrun these rapid streaks of sword chi, and he was only able to get a small distance away before the streaks of sword chi struck his heavy water true axis. The axis instantly began to tremble violently as a string of metallic clangs rang out in rapid succession, and the black water barrier that it had released was quickly being worn down. A rumbling thunderclap erupted out of Han Li's body as he accelerated drastically in his retreat, flying back to several dozen kilometers away in the blink of an eye. As for the azure sword chi, all of it abruptly dissipated after reaching a certain distance away from the altar, much to Han Li's relief. After waiting for a moment to ensure that there would be no more sword chi coming after him, he swept a sleeve through the air to stow his heavy water true axis away. Meanwhile, the azure sun in the distance flashed a few times, and the azure light that it was radiating rapidly dimmed before fading away altogether, revealing the 72 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords hovering in midair in a circle. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up as he flew over to the circle of azure swords. Following this latest refinement, the outward appearance of the azure bamboo cloud swarm swords hadn't changed much. They had become more translucent, and bursts of azure energy were just barely visible flowing inside. Enormous spiritual power fluctuations were emanating out of the flying swords, causing the nearby world's origin chi to shudder and tremble, and a massive spiritual power vortex had taken shape around them. Upon sensing Han Li's arrival, the 72 flying swords suddenly flew through the air in a blur, transforming into 72 streaks of azure light before vanishing into his dantian in the blink of an eye. Han Li was quite startled by this, but he could sense that the azure bamboo cloud swarm swords were merely hovering in his dantian in a still manner. With the flying swords inside his dantian, he was able to get an even clearer sense of the changes that had taken place within them. After absorbing such an immeasurable amount of sword essence, it was no exaggeration to say that the azure bamboo cloud swarm swords had been reborn anew. In their current form, just a single one of his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords contained far more spiritual power than any of his other immortal treasures, including even the heavy water true axis that he had painstakingly refined. However, due to the fact that this spiritual power came from the sword essence of countless different swords, it was a little chaotic and erratic. This was something that had happened once before after the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords had absorbed the sword essence from the thousand-edged spirit gathering sword formation last time, so Han Li wasn't concerned. Looking at the 72 swords in his dantian, he locked onto one of them with his spiritual sense before sweeping a sleeve through the air, and only after a few flashes of azure light did the flying sword appear before him. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this. It seemed that the flying swords had become more difficult to control, and they also felt heavier and more cumbersome. However, this was only to be expected, considering how much more powerful they had become, and it should be possible to resolve these issues following another bout of refinement. With that in mind, Han Li made a hand seal before pointing a finger forward, and a layer of azure light instantly appeared over the flying sword's surface. The sword then moved a few times before falling still again. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he opened his mouth to release a burst of azure light that enveloped the flying sword in a flash. The azure light radiating from the flying sword became even brighter, and once again, it moved a little before falling still. Han Li's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this, and he channeled all of the immortal spiritual power in his body, releasing 2 bursts of dense azure light out of the palms of his hands, both of which surged into the flying sword. At the same time, his spiritual sense also flooded into the flying sword, and the azure light radiating from the sword's surface instantly brightened even further. All of a sudden, the flying sword twisted around before shooting through the air like an azure spirit snake, while expanding drastically in size, swelling to over 1,000 feet in length as it radiated blinding azure sword light. The entire surrounding space began to tremble in the wake of the tremendous sword intent emanating from the giant sword, and all of the nearby world's origin chi instantly converged toward it. The light radiating from the huge sword continued to grow brighter and brighter as it pierced back and forth through the clouds like an enormous azure dragon. The cloud in the sky surged and churned violently before rapidly dissipating to reveal the clear, blue sky up above. Only then did a hint of relief appear on Han Li's face, and a look of elation surfaced in his eyes at the sight of the giant sword. The sword had become far more formidable than he anticipated, and it wasn't inferior in the slightest, compared with the combined power of the entire set of 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords in their previous form. All of a sudden, he made a hand seal, and arcs of thick and radiant golden lightning instantly emerged over the giant azure sword. The arcs of lightning were flashing over the blade of the sword like a flight of prowling dragons, giving off a violent and primordial aura. In the blink of an eye, the giant azure sword had transformed into a golden lightning sword and was giving off a devastating aura of destruction. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing these. The comparison between these arcs of golden lightning and his divine devilbane lightning from before was no different from that between night and day. Not only had the lightning become at least several times more powerful, there also seemed to be some type of new, unidentifiable property about them. Han Li hesitated momentarily before making another hand seal, and the giant lightning sword in the sky instantly stopped in its tracks before becoming even brighter. Immediately thereafter, it swept through the air as if it were being swung by an enormous, invisible hand. A streak of gargantuan azure sword chi swept forth, and it was several kilometers wide with arcs of golden lightning surging over its surface, presenting an astonishing sight to behold. The azure sword chi erupted in all directions, tearing through the very space itself to create countless black spatial rifts, while also causing the surrounding space to warp and tremble violently. The streak of giant sword chi vanished into space in the blink of an eye, but the disturbance continued to rage on, and the entire secret area was beginning to tremble and sway. Only after a long time had passed were peace and quiet restored. There were some mixed emotions in Han Li's eyes as he looked on in silence. After unleashing that slash, all of the golden lightning around the giant sword dissipated, as if it had exhausted all of its power. That power of that slash was approaching the level of an all-out attack unleashed by Han Li's profound heavenly spirit/sword in the past, and this was only the power of a single sword, so it was difficult to imagine just how powerful all 72 swords combined would be. With that in mind, a surge of excitement welled up in Han Li's heart. However, the problem was that it was taking virtually all of his immortal spiritual power and spiritual sense to control this single flying sword, rendering him unable to do much else. With that in mind, much of Han Li's enthusiasm was instantly dampened. A thought then suddenly sprang into his mind, and he raised an eyebrow as he thought back to how the flying swords had just flown into his dantian on their own. Perhaps the situation wasn't what he imagined it to be. With that in mind, Han Li enveloped the 71 flying swords in his dantian with his spiritual sense before attempting to draw upon them, but the only response that he received was a faint flash of azure light. He then channeled all of his immortal spiritual power before attempting the same thing, but all of the flying swords remained completely still and unmoved. Han Li heaved a faint sigh upon seeing this. In their current form, the flying swords in his dantian had become incredibly heavy, and attempting to move them with his current level of immortal spiritual power was no different from an ant attempting to move a mountain. Thankfully, his spiritual connection with the azure bamboo cloud swarm swords still remained, so he should be able to use them once he attained sufficient power. After heaving another faint sigh, he made no further attempt to summon all of the remaining flying swords at once, instead focusing his spiritual sense on summoning just a single additional sword. A second azure flying sword emerged in front of him at his behest, and Han Li took a deep breath before channeling all of his immortal spiritual power and spiritual sense before making a hand seal. Bright azure light flashed over the surface of the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword a few times, but it remained completely still. Meanwhile, Han Li was feeling a little dizzy from overexertion of immortal spiritual power and spiritual sense, and he hurriedly stopped what he was doing. After that, he stowed the flying sword away, as a contemplative look appeared on his face. It seemed that at his current level of power, controlling a single azure bamboo cloud swarm sword was already his limit. The giant azure sword slowly flew through the air, and even though all of the formidable arcs of golden lightning on its surface had already faded, it was still giving off mountainous pressure. Han Li made a beckoning motion, and the giant azure sword flew down while rapidly shrinking before vanishing up his sleeve as a miniature azure sword, following which he drifted back down onto the ground, where he was greeted by Yuking. "Congratulations, Brother Han. I can see that your flying swords have become far more formidable," Yuking congratulated with a beaming smile. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he asked, "The fact that you're here must mean that all of the puppets from before have been taken care of, right?" Yuking nodded in response. At this point, the phenomena in the sky had completely faded, and the entire secret area was restored to its original state, while the clouds that had been scattered by the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword were also slowly recovering. "It doesn't look like there are any other treasures in here, and we've already been here for a very long time. The entrance of this secret area is quite difficult to access, but there's no guarantee that Zhu Han and the others won't be able to follow us into this place, so it's best for us to leave as quickly as possible, Han Li said. Lu Yuking faltered slightly upon hearing this, and a slightly hesitant look appeared on her face. Is there something else that you have to do here? Han Li asked upon noticing her expression. No, you're right, Brother Han. It's best for us to leave this place as quickly as possible. But before that, please wait for me for a moment, Lu Yuking said, then flew toward the ancestral hall of the Taoist temple in the distance, where she swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light that swept up all of the memorial tablets inside before stowing them away. After that, she flew back to Han Li's side and said, "I'm ready to go." Han Li was rather taken aback to see this, but he didn't ask any questions, and he began to fly down the mountain, followed closely by Lu Yuking. Perhaps it was due to the destruction of the white altar in the sky, or the disappearance of all of the flying swords on the meadow. In any case, the boundless sword qi in the air had completely faded, allowing them to fly without any obstruction. The two of them had only just risen up into the air when a burst of thunderous rumbling suddenly rang out, following which the entire secret area began to tremble violently. What's going on? Han Li's expression instantly changed slightly as he stopped in his tracks. All of a sudden, a pillar of white light had erupted into the heavens in the distance behind him. The pillar of white light was incredibly thick, with a diameter of at least several hundred feet, and it was giving off tremendous spiritual power fluctuations that were quite alarming even to Han Li. Lu Yuking was also staring at the pillar of white light in the distance with an astonished look on her face, and right at this moment, another rumbling boom rang out in another direction as the entire secret area shuddered violently once again. A second pillar of white light had appeared there, and it was also extending directly up into the sky. Han Li and Lu Yuking were even more alarmed upon seeing this. The two pillars of light seemed to be resonating with one another, and the trembling of the entire secret area was becoming more and more violent, presenting a doomsday-like scene to behold. This secret area is about to collapse. We have to get out of here, Han Li exclaimed in an urgent voice as he flew down the mountain as a streak of azure light, and Lu Yuking hurriedly followed along. As he was flying down the mountain, Han Li's mind was racing as he tried to pinpoint a reason for the collapse of the secret area. Could it be that the destruction of the white altar had triggered the secret area's demise? Or could it be that the sword strike that he had just unleashed had damaged some important point in the secret area? However, he then quickly shook his head to rid himself of that thought. There was no point in pondering this matter, and his top priority now was to get out of this place as quickly as possible. With that in mind, he accelerated even further, and the two of them arrived at the foot of the mountain in the blink of an eye, returning to the place where they had first entered the secret area. Meanwhile, a third pillar of white light had risen up elsewhere in the secret area, and the tremors running through the entire secret area had become even more severe. Han Li swept his spiritual sense through the nearby area, upon which his expression instantly darkened slightly. The space here was extremely stable with no spatial passageways or teleportation formations to facilitate their escape. He had always thought that this place served as both the entrance and the exit of the secret area, but it seemed that he was incorrect in that assumption. Lu Yuking had sensed the exact same thing, and a grim look had appeared on her face as well. Fellow Taoist Lu, I noticed that you've been exploring this secret area over the course of the past 3 days. Have you discovered any exits or any abnormal places? Han Li asked as he turned to Lu Yuking. I'm afraid not. The entire secret area seems to have already been ransacked by Chung Shan, and all I stumbled upon were some damaged buildings and destroyed restrictions, Lu Yuking replied with a shake of her head. Han Li cast his gaze forward once again upon hearing this. At his current level of power, It was not very feasible for him to forcibly tear open a spatial passageway. After all, the space in the immortal realm was far more stable than that of lower realms like the spirit domain realm. Furthermore, even if he could tear open the space here, there was no guarantee that the resulting spatial passageway would lead to anywhere safe, and there was a very good chance that he would be swept up by the boundless spatial currents and killed. Right at this moment, a fourth pillar of white light emerged in the secret area with another resounding boom, and the entire secret area was swaying extremely violently at this point. A string of loud cracks rang out overhead as a series of white rifts appeared up above, and they quickly spread in all directions like cracks on the surface of a mirror. Yuking's face instantly turned deathly pale upon seeing this. "There's no time to waste. Let's split up and try to search for an exit," Han Li said in an urgent voice, then immediately flew away in a certain direction. Yuking nodded in response before flying away in another direction. But she had only flown a short distance away when she suddenly stopped in her tracks, and a slightly befuddled look appeared on her face as she cast her gaze toward a spot halfway up the mountain. After a brief moment of hesitation, she flew in that direction as a streak of azure light. Meanwhile, Han Li was flying back up toward the mountain summit while scouring his surroundings with all his might using his spiritual sense and his bright-sight spirit eyes, as well as his eye of truth. At his speed, he was quickly able to scour the majority of the entire mountain, and right at this moment, he suddenly stopped cold in his tracks. All of the greenery further up the mountain had already been completely uprooted to reveal the bare mountain face, and he could see that there was nothing up there. No additional pillars of white light had appeared after the fourth one, but the spatial rifts in the sky were rapidly spreading and expanding. The tremors running through the entire secret area were becoming more and more violent, and an agitated look flashed through Han Li's eyes as he hurriedly flew away in another direction. Right at this moment, Yuking's voice suddenly rang out in his mind. "Brother Han, come to me, hurry." Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this, then cast his gaze in a certain direction before flying away as a streak of azure light. At this moment, Yuking was standing somewhere halfway up the mountain, scrutinizing a section of the mountain face with black light shimmering in her eyes. Han Li arrived by her side amid a flash of azure light, then cast his gaze toward the same spot with his bright-sight spirit eyes, but failed to discover anything. "Have you found something, fellow Taoist Lu?" He summoned his mantra treasured axis as he spoke, then began to observe the mountain face through his eye of truth, upon which an elated look instantly appeared on his face. He flicked a finger through the air, releasing a streak of azure sword chi that struck the mountain face, and the streak of sword chi instantly vanished in a flash, while the mountain face rippled slightly before returning to its original state. "There really is a restriction here. Looks like your spirit eyes are sharper than mine," Han Li said as his eyes lit up. Yuking faltered slightly upon hearing this, then forced a smile onto her own face as she replied, "Not at all. I was simply lucky to have stumbled upon this place. I wonder what's behind the restriction." Han Li noticed that Yuking's expression was a little unnatural, but there was no time for him to ponder such matters as he replied, "There's only one way to find out." Immediately thereafter, he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a giant azure sword that was radiating dazzling azure swordlight. Arcs of thick golden lightning sprang forth from the surface of the giant sword, instantly transforming it into a golden lightning sword that was giving off a terrifying destructive aura. Han Li made a hand seal, and the golden lightning sword crashed heavily into the mountain face with tremendous force. The restriction on the mountain face immediately began to radiate dazzling white light, forming a thick white light barrier to protect itself, and balls of white spiritual light were dancing around within it like living creatures to oppose the giant sword. The white light barrier appeared quite profound, but it was torn apart with ease by the golden lightning sword, dissipating into countless specks of white spiritual light to reveal a small valley. A large azure hall was situated within the valley, and above the entrance of the hall was a plaque that read, "Flying Immortal Pavilion." The gate of the hall was slightly ajar with several dim specks of white light visible through it, interspersed with faint spatial fluctuations. Han Li and Lu Yuking were both ecstatic to detect these spatial fluctuations, and they immediately flew through the entrance of the hall to arrive inside. Despite its large size, the interior of the hall was actually very empty, with only a stone platform inside that was around 3 feet tall and over 100 feet in diameter. On the stone platform was a white formation that was giving off faint white light, and Han Li immediately flew onto the platform in a flash, then quickly inspected the white formation momentarily before giving a contemplative nod. This was indeed a teleportation formation, and it was most likely the exit of this secret area. There was an immortal origin stones embedded into each of the nodes on the formation, amounting to a total of over 200 immortal origin stones. However, only a small proportion of these immortal origin stones still hadn't immortal spiritual power left within them, while the rest had already become completely transparent. Right at this moment, a string of resounding booms rang out overhead, and the 4 pillars of white light dissipated in a flash. The entire secret area was finally beginning to truly collapse, and a spatial rift had just extended over the mountain. The mountain summit exploded violently, sending countless giant rocks tumbling down from above, and the valley was also at risk of being crushed under the avalanche. "Hurry!" Han Li yelled as he swept a sleeve through the air, and the 7 bright star rings shot out in a flash, then connected together with one another to form a larger ring. Radiant starlight erupted out of the 7 bright star rings, forming a starry light barrier with countless star designs flashing on its surface to oppose the avalanche that was tumbling down from above. Meanwhile, Han Li and Lu Yuking immediately sprang into action, plucking out all of the spent immortal origin stones before replacing them with new ones. With a set of new immortal origin stones installed, the white light radiating from the teleportation formation instantly became several times brighter. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and he was just about to step into the formation when his brows suddenly furrowed slightly as he cast his gaze toward a corner of the formation. At this moment, the entire formation was radiating resplendent white light with the exception of that corner, and the flow of immortal spiritual power through that area was also rather labored. Lu Yuking had also noticed this, and an anxious look appeared on her face as she asked, "Is the teleportation formation damaged?" Han Li offered no response as he cast a series of incantation seals into the dim corner of the formation, and the corner immediately lit up slightly, but then turned dark once again. Han Li hurriedly stopped what he was doing upon seeing this, and he said, "It looks like the teleportation formation is about to lose its effectiveness due to prolonged lack of maintenance." "What do we do then, Brother Han? Do you have a way to repair it?" Lu Yuking asked in an urgent voice. At this point, the tremors running through the entire secret area were becoming more and more violent, and a series of giant cracks had also appeared on the mountain. "This formation is too complex for me to repair, and even if I could, we don't have enough time. Having said that, there's no need to be concerned. The formation is still just barely functional and it should be able to work one more time," Han Li replied, then immediately stepped into the formation. Lu Yuking's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and she immediately stepped into the formation as well. Han Li chanted an incantation before casting an incantation seal, and the teleportation formation instantly lit up with radiant white light that erupted straight into the heavens. Meanwhile, Zhu Han and the other ubiquitous pavilion cultivators had only just emerged at the entrance of the secret area at the foot of the mountain amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. There was an enraged look on Zhu Han's face, and he seemed to be in the process of scolding the other ubiquitous pavilion cultivators. "You're all a bunch of useless fools. You can't do anything without me. How has it taken you 3 whole days just to find an entrance?" Before he had a chance to finish, his voice abruptly cut off at the sight of the collapsing secret area before him, and everyone else was also instantly rooted to the spot. "Get back, this space is about to collapse," Zhu Han roared as he immediately turned back the same way he had come from. However, the spatial fluctuations at the entrance had already subsided, and the space was completely stable, meaning that there was no way back. A layer of cold sweat instantly appeared on Zhu Han's forehead. He was well aware of just how terrifying a collapsing space could be, and even he wouldn't be able to survive such a disaster. "Look over there, Master Zhu Han," Layman Bone Flame yelled as he pointed at a burst of dazzling white light that had appeared halfway up the mountain. Zhu Han immediately released his spiritual sense in that direction, seeing this, and an ecstatic look appeared on his face as he yelled, "It's them. They're trying to leave using the teleportation formation." He then immediately set off in that direction as a streak of black light, and everyone else hurriedly followed along. Inside the hall, the teleportation formation was glowing brighter and brighter, but Han Li didn't dare to speed up the process too much for fear of exacerbating the existing damage in the formation. As time passed, the entire formation glowed brighter and brighter, with the exception of the one damaged corner, which was only dimming with each passing second. Droplets of cold sweat were beginning to bead up on Han Li's forehead, and Lu Yuking was also staring intently at that corner of the formation with a tense expression. All of a sudden, she turned toward the foot of the mountain with an alarmed expression, where several streaks of light were rapidly approaching. "Brother Han, Zhu Han and the others are here," she immediately yelled in an urgent voice. Han Li's attention was entirely focused on the formation, so he wasn't keeping tabs on what was happening around him, and he immediately raised his head upon hearing this. At this point, the streak of black light that contained Zhu Han had already arrived outside the hall, and it was rapidly approaching. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this, and he hurriedly made a hand seal, upon which the starlight barrier above the valley abruptly disappeared. The 7 bright star rings emerged out of thin air, then vanished from the spot in the blink of an eye, and in the next instant, they reappeared in front of the hall before flying into the streak of black light formed by Zhu Han. A furious roar rang out as Zhu Han was stopped cold in his tracks, and a ring had appeared around each of his 4 limbs, his chest, his lower abdomen and his neck, digging deep into his skin. "What the hell is this?" he roared in a furious voice as he struggled with all his might, while black light surged over his body. The black light quickly spread over the 7 bright star rings like ink, overpowering the starlight radiating from them, but they remained resolute around Zhu Han's body. Meanwhile, Han Li opened his mouth to release a ball of azure light into the formation, and the white light radiating from the formation brightened even further, seemingly having reached a certain threshold. Bursts of spatial power surged out of the formation to envelop Han Li and Lu Yuking, and in the next instant, both of them vanished into thin air. At the same time, the damaged corner of the teleportation formation also reached its limits, and a series of cracks appeared over its surface. The white light radiating from the formation flashed one final time before fading away as well, and Zhu Han was still immobilized outside the hall. At this moment, there was radiant black light erupting out of his body, and the 7 bright star rings were finally unable to hold on any longer, shattering into countless pieces that flew away in all directions. Zhu Han immediately stormed into the hall, and an extremely grim look appeared on his face at the sight of the damaged teleportation formation. At this point, Layman Bone Flame and the others also arrived on the scene, and their hearts immediately sank at the sight that they were greeted by. Right at this moment, the secret area finally completely collapsed, and powerful bursts of spatial turbulence erupted out of the spatial rifts. The entire mountain collapsed violently, sending countless giant rocks crashing down to inundate the small valley. In a certain dim space, there was a boundless black desert down below, and the ground was riddled with black rocks of different sizes. Vegetation was extremely sparse here, and the entire area looked extremely bleak and desolate. The sky was a dark yellow color, and all of a sudden, a rumbling thunderclap rang out. Immediately thereafter, bursts of black light emerged before forming a ball of black light that was several dozen feet in size, and arcs of black light were flashing incessantly over its surface. The ball of black light warped and twisted before suddenly elongating to form a spatial rift that was several dozen feet in length, and a pair of figures, one male and one female, stumbled out from within. The two were none other than Han Li and Lu Yuking, who had arrived here through the teleportation formation, and at this moment, both of them were looking rather worse for wear. In particular, Lu Yuking was as pale as a sheet, and there was a thin trail of blood running down from the corner of her lips. After steadying themselves, both Han Li and Lu Yuking heaved a collective sigh of relief. The teleportation formation seemed to have transported them out of the secret area earlier, but it had actually suddenly collapsed at a crucial juncture, casting them into an area of spatial turbulence, and it had taken them a great deal of effort to escape. The spatial rift flashed a few times before abruptly vanishing, and Han Li inspected his surroundings briefly while releasing his spiritual sense throughout the nearby area. Lu Yuking's expression eased slightly at the sight of the surrounding environment, and she quickly swallowed a pill, upon which her complexion immediately began to improve. "Where are we right now? Have we been teleported out of the infernal frost immortal manor?" she asked in a slightly uneasy manner. Even a slight deviation in a teleportation formation could result in a vast difference in the destination, and the fact that they had been cast into a spatial storm certainly wasn't going to help the matter. "I don't think so. I can still detect the profound glacial chi that's unique to the light frost region here, so we should still be in the immortal manor," Han Li replied. "Good," Lu Yuking said with a relieved expression. "That teleportation formation has already been destroyed, so Zhu Han and the others will most likely fall to their demise along with that secret area. We should be able to take some time to rest and recuperate here," Han Li continued. Lu Yuking had sustained some rather severe injuries, and even though he was uninjured, he had virtually used up all of his immortal spiritual power in the process of escaping from the spatial turbulence. This place appeared to be quite bleak and desolate, but at the very least, it seemed to be safe. Lu Yuking was in desperate need of some rest, and she immediately nodded in agreement. Hence, the two of them descended onto the desert, then set up a few restrictions around themselves before sitting down with their legs crossed. Han Li summoned a pair of immortal origin stones to help himself replenish his immortal spiritual power, and close to a day later, he had made a full recovery. After withstanding a string of ordeals in the infernal frost immortal manor, his cultivation base had advanced a little further, but that final immortal acupoint still showed no sign of budging. A resigned look appeared on his face as diverted his attention away from the stubborn immortal acupoint, then turned to the side to find that Lu Yuking was still meditating with a spherical azure light barrier around her. Han Li withdrew his gaze, then swept a sleeve through the air to summon a gray stone slab, the very same one that contained the second half of the great universe origin arts. He had been too busy earlier to take a close look at the cultivation art, and he was eager to take advantage of this window of respite. Blue light flashed within his eyes as he inspected the stone slab closely, and around 2 hours later, the blue light in his eyes faded as he withdrew his gaze. He had already completely memorized the second half of the great universe origin arts, and just like the first half of the cultivation, the second half also laid out the method required to open 18 profound acupoints. He was confident that if he could master the second half of the cultivation art and open this second set of 18 profound acupoints, then he would be able to break through his final immortal acupoint with no issues. Just like the first half, the second half of the great universe origin arts also involved guiding starpor into the body to open up profound acupoints. However, the second half of the cultivation art was far more complex than the first half, and not only was an enormous amount of starpor required to open the second set of 18 profound acupoints, a considerably long time had to be spent on bodily refinement as well, making the process far more rigorous than what had been laid out in the first half of the cultivation art. He wanted nothing more than to drop everything and immediately find a place to go into seclusion, but this was clearly not a suitable place for seclusion. On top of that, he still had to help Taoist Hu Yan secure whatever treasure he was searching for in the limited time left, so that he could obtain the second part of the mantra treasured axis. So he would have to save the great universe origin arts for later. With that in mind, stowed the gray stone slab away again, then cast his gaze forward with a contemplative look in his eyes. He didn't know where Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai were at this moment, and he also had no idea what the treasure Taoist Hu Yan had been referring to was. The infernal frost immortal manor was far more complex a place than he had imagined. It was an enormous place that rivaled a small continent, and he had no idea where to find Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai. Han Li shook his head to rid himself of that train of thought, and right as he was about to close his eyes, he suddenly raised an eyebrow as if a thought had occurred to him. He then raised a hand, and Chung Shan's storage bracelet appeared in his grasp. He still hadn't had a chance to examine the storage bracelet yet. Considering he had been quite a formidable swordsman with unknown ties to the boundless sword sect, surely his storage bracelet had to have been a precious treasure trove. With that in mind, Han Li was feeling a little excited, but his smile instantly stiffened as soon as he injected his spiritual sense into the storage bracelet. To his surprise, Chung Shan's storage bracelet was completely empty. That wasn't entirely the truth, as there were some items piled up in a corner of the storage bracelet's internal space, but none of those things were very valuable. The only things that were even slightly appealing to Han Li were several vials of recovery pills and a few scriptures, and there were barely even any immortal origin stones. Han Li was initially quite perplexed to see this, but he quickly came to understand why this was the case. Chung Shan had already exhausted all of his resources for the sake of his previous sword refinement attempt, and only several centuries had passed since then, so it was only to be expected that he had to empty his pockets again for this second sword refinement. Furthermore, as soon as he entered the Light Frost Palace, he had immediately traveled straight to the Boundless Sword Sect, so he didn't have any time to collect any treasures along the way, and that was why his storage bracelet was so barren and desolate. Han Li was slightly disappointed to see this, but he then quickly reminded himself that he had already reaped many rewards in the Light Frost Palace, and asking for any more would only be a sign of excessive greed, which was certainly not a good thing. With that in mind, the disappointment in his heart quickly faded away, and he swept a sleeve through the air to release all of the storage bracelet's contents, then briefly sorted through them, splitting them up into different categories before stowing them away. Before long, all that remained in front of him was a silver jade box, within which were their jade slips. He was quite interested in the cultivation arts that Chung Shan had been using prior to his death, and he picked up one of the 3 jade slips before injecting his spiritual sense into it. This jade slip contained a cultivation art by the name of the Great Destruction Yang Sword Arts. The cultivation art could support one's cultivation to the golden immortal stage, and it had most likely been Chung Shan's primary cultivation art. According to the description of the Great Destruction Yang Sword Arts, the cultivation art granted one mastery over the laws of metal, and it was rather similar in nature to the laws of destruction. Han Li hadn't dabbled in metal attribute cultivation arts in the past, and he had no intention of beginning now, so this cultivation art wasn't very useful to him. However, there were some sword-related secret techniques and insights recorded at the very end of the cultivation art that could be useful for reference purposes. He read through the entire cultivation art from beginning to end, then placed it back into the jade box before picking out another jade slip and injecting his spiritual sense into it. This jade slip contained a body refinement cultivation art by the name of the Golden Arhat Arts, and it appeared to be the secret technique that Chung Shan had unleashed while climbing the stairs outside of the Light Frost Palace. This was quite a remarkable body refinement art that granted one tremendous physical prowess, but a mastery over the laws of metal were required to cultivate it. Han Li immediately lost interest in the cultivation art upon seeing this prerequisite, and he only briefly read through its contents before setting it down again and picking up the final jade slip. This jade slip contained some pill recipes, most of which were for earthy metal attribute pills, which would be quite helpful for true immortals using metal attribute cultivation arts. Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip, as a hint of befuddlement flashed through his eyes. None of the jade slips had contained any records of the 1,000-edged spirit gathering sword formation. Could it be that Chung Shan had destroyed those records? A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face as he pondered this matter, and he was just about to stow the jade box away when he suddenly seemed to have noticed something. He fiddled with the jade box briefly, and it suddenly split apart down the middle with a faint crack. As it turned out, there was a hidden compartment with what appeared to be a piece of gray cloth inside. "What's this?" Han Li picked up the gray cloth to find that it was roughly square in shape, and it resembled a dirty rag, but upon closer inspection, he noticed some faint patterns on the cloth. These patterns were very strange in appearance, and even with Han Li's vast wealth of knowledge and experience, he was at a complete loss as to what they were. However, there was something profound about these patterns that convinced him that they definitely weren't just haphazard designs casually drawn onto a cloth. The gray cloth was very smooth and slightly cool to the touch, and it was unclear what type of material it had been fashioned out of. Han Li inspected the cloth back and forth for a long while, even using his bright-sight spirit eyes and eye of truth in the process, but was unable to find anything worthy of note. The gray cloth wasn't giving off any spiritual power fluctuations, and if it weren't for those profound patterns, it would have appeared no different from a normal rag. However, the fact that Chung Shan had stored it away so carefully clearly indicated that it was no ordinary object. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face as he absent-mindedly rubbed the cloth between his fingers, upon which a hint of surprise appeared on his face. With his physical strength, that casual rubbing motion would have been enough to tear a steel slab apart, yet the gray cloth remained completely unscathed. Han Li grabbed onto the cloth with both hands and attempted to pull it apart, but it refused to budge. He raised an eyebrow as he exerted even more force through his hands, but the gray cloth was able to easily hold itself together. An intrigued look flashed through Han Li's eyes as he switched tactics, attempting to tear the cloth apart down the middle this time, but still to no avail. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. He had exerted sufficient force to tear apart even an ordinary spirit treasure just now, yet this gray cloth remained completely unscathed, so there had to be something special about it. Han Li wanted to test the limits of the gray cloth's resilience, and he continued to exert more and more force until he was going all out, but he was still unable to tear the cloth apart. A curious look appeared on his face as he began to inspect the gray cloth again. After a brief moment of contemplation, he flicked a finger through the air, releasing a ball of crimson flames that enveloped the entire cloth, subjecting it to scorching heat, but it remained completely unscathed. With a wave of his sleeve, Han Li snuffed out the flame, then released a ball of heavy water to envelop the gray cloth, and once again it was completely unaffected. Around an hour later, Han Li was staring at the gray cloth in his hand with a defeated expression. During the past hour, he had tried everything that he could think of to get any type of reaction out of the gray cloth, but his attempts had ended in complete failure. After staring at the gray cloth for a while longer, Han Li stowed it away with a resigned smile, deciding that he would look into it another time. Right at this moment, the spherical azure light barrier around Lu Yuking flashed a few times before fading away, and as she opened her eyes, her complexion was looking much better. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Brother Han," she said as she rose to her feet. "It's fine. Take a look and see if you can identify roughly where we are right now," Han Li said as he gestured at their surroundings. "According to my knowledge, the Light Frost region is a very complex place, and there's more than one desert of this description in the region, so I can't tell where we are based only on what I can see right now," Lu Yuking replied with a shake of her head. "In that case, let's do some exploring. This place looks quite barren and desolate, but we shouldn't underestimate it," Han Li said as he summoned his azure flying boat before stepping onto it. Lu Yuking naturally raised no objections and descended onto the flying boat as well. Immediately thereafter, the flying boat sped away in a certain direction at Han Li's behest. Just like the ice field from before, there was a type of invisible force in this area that severely restricted one's spiritual sense, and even Han Li's spiritual sensory range had been reduced to only several hundred kilometers in radius, so he decided to proceed at a moderate speed as a safety precaution. Moments later, he suddenly raised an eyebrow as he turned in a certain direction, and the azure flying boat also faltered slightly. "Have you found something, Brother Han?" Lu Yuking asked. "I have, but it's not worth very much. So be it, let's go and take a look," Han Li said as the flying boat diverged slightly from its original path, quickly covering a distance of close to 200 kilometers to the left. Han Li and Lu Yuking then drifted down onto the ground from the flying boat. A large patch of dark purple mushrooms were growing over the ground down below, and every single mushroom was around 10 feet tall. The mushrooms were covered in dark purple spots, while their edges were a bright red color, giving them an extremely vibrant appearance. This cluster of mushrooms took up an area of around an acre, and they resembled a vibrant sea of flowers growing on this barren desert, seemingly completely out of place. "These are mulcloud mushrooms," Lu Yuking exclaimed as her eyes lit up. "Could it be that you've managed to ascertain our current location thanks to these mushrooms?" Han Li asked. He had seen some records pertaining to mulcloud mushrooms before, and he knew that they were extremely poisonous and could be used to refine certain poisons or poison attribute treasures. However, their poison was only effective against cultivators below the true immortal stage, while those who had attained immortal bodies were impervious to its effects. "That's right," Lu Yuking replied with an excited expression. She flipped a hand over to produce a green jade pendant as she spoke, then cast a streak of azure light into it, and a burst of green light surged out of the pendant, projecting a green light screen. The light screen was a map that was comprised of around a dozen components of different colors, and it appeared to be only half of a full map. "Is this the map of the light frost region that you mentioned previously?" Hanley asked. "That's right. According to the information that our Black Wind Island was able to gather, the light frost region consists of close to 100 different environments. Unfortunately, this map only contains around a dozen of those areas," Yuking replied with a nod. Hanley nodded in response with a contemplative expression, and his gaze began to roam over the map. The map was extremely detailed and lifelike, presenting many details that would have been absent in the average map. However, it didn't contain the ice field, the Black Mountain Range, and the Black Sea that they had passed through previously. "None of the 3 areas that we passed through prior to this were on my map. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been so lost," Yuking said. "So where are we right now?" Hanley asked. Only now was he beginning to develop a rough idea of the light frost region's layout. "We're here. This place is called the Black Rock Desert, and according to my sources, there are 3 or 4 deserts in the light frost region, but this is the only one where mull cloud mushrooms can be found," Yuking replied as she pointed at a black area on the upper part of the map. "It's good that we've finally managed to ascertain our location. Stumbling around in the Immortal Palace without any idea of where we are is far too dangerous," Hanley said. "The Black Rock Desert is actually one of the safer areas on my map. There are no frost beasts here, nor any large-scale hazards like glacial storms," Yuking said. "We're quite lucky not to have been teleported to a more dangerous area," Hanley said in an ambiguous fashion. "Indeed, we're extremely lucky, Brother Han," Yuking replied with a meaningful smile. "Oh, is there something I'm missing, fellow Taoist Lu?" Hanley asked as he raised an eyebrow. "Do you see this place here, Brother Han?" Yuking asked as she pointed at the upper region of the Black Rock Desert. "Is there something special about that area?" Hanley asked. "That place is called the Boundless Sand Sea, and it's the northernmost point of the light frost region," Yuking replied. "So what? Are there some precious treasures in this boundless sand sea?" Hanley asked. "I don't know about that, but as you're already aware, there are other unexplored regions in the infernal frost immortal manner aside from the light frost region, and it's said that the one must go through the boundless sand sea to access those other regions," Yuking replied. "Really?" Hanley was very intrigued to hear this. "Of course. The light frost region has already been mostly explored by cultivators who had previously entered the immortal manor, and I've been meaning to go to the other regions to see what I can find there, but I haven't been able to find the boundless sand sea. Who could have predicted that we would end up so close to the boundless sand sea after that mishap?" Yuking said with an excited expression. "In that case, we really are extremely fortunate. Time is of the essence, so let's set off right away," Hanley said as he returned to his azure flying boat. The light frost region had already been scoured countless times, yet even so, he was still able to reap many significant rewards. If he were to go to an unexplored region of the immortal manor, who knew what would be waiting for him there? Yuking stowed her azure jade pendant away, before also flying back onto the azure spirit boat, following which the flying boat sped away into the distance at Hanley's behest. 3 days later, Hanley and Yuking appeared in front of a vast yellow desert. The sand in the desert was a light yellow color and rather translucent in appearance, reflecting the light of the sun in a blinding fashion. At the same time, waves of heat were surging through the air, and it was as if this entire place were a massive lit furnace. "This is the place, right?" Hanley asked. "That's right, this is the boundless sand sea," Yuking replied with excitement shimmering in her eyes. Instead of immediately venturing into the area, Hanley asked, "This doesn't look like a very safe place. Do you know if there are any hazards present here?" "You have a very sharp eye, Brother Han. There are indeed quite a few hazards in this area. For example, this desert is filled with fire poison, and anyone who sets foot into it will slowly be poisoned. Even golden immortals will be affected given enough time, Lu Yuking replied. Fire poison. I'm assuming this is no ordinary fire poison, Hanli said as his brows furrowed slightly. Indeed, the poison can't be treated with any ordinary pills, and the only cure is to find a water spirit area in the desert and use the special water spiritual chi there to gradually neutralize the fire poison. If one is unable to find a water spirit area and has become too severely poisoned, then even a golden immortal could die in this desert, Lu Yuking said with a serious expression. What other hazards are there? Hanli asked. Aside from the fire poison, it said that one could fall prey to extremely confounding mirages in the desert that could make one lose their way and become trapped in the desert forever. This desert is extremely notorious for these two hazards, and very few people who enter the infernal frost immortal manor set foot in this place, Lu Yuking replied. This does sound like an extremely perilous place. You're saying that there's a pathway to another region somewhere in this desert? Hanli asked. The pathway is deep within the boundless sand sea, but there's no need to be concerned, Brother Han. I have a map of the boundless sand sea, so as long we proceed with caution and follow the map, we should be able to find the pathway just fine, Lu Yuking replied as she summoned a jade slip before offering it to Hanli. Hanli accepted the jade slip from Lu Yuking before pressing it against his own forehead, and a short while later, he withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip before handing it back to Lu Yuking as he remarked, "This is quite a detailed map. May I ask where you got it from? Was it from that stone plaque?" "That's right. It's exactly because I have this map that I wanted to come to the boundless sand sea, but even with this map in my possession, I'll be counting on you to get us through the boundless sand sea, Brother Han," Lu Yuking replied. "I'll do my best," Hanli said in an ambiguous fashion, following which the azure flying boat beneath his feet flew into the desert at his behest. Upon entering the boundless sand sea, the two of them instantly felt the air temperature rise dramatically, making them feel as if they had entered a steamer. "Let's try and determine our current location before we do anything else, fellow Taoist Lu," Hanli suggested. "That's a good idea. I don't know exactly where we are right now, but I should be able to determine our location once we encounter 2 or 3 of the places recorded on the map," Lu Yuking replied with a nod. At the same time, there was a certain mountain range in the immortal realm that was extremely majestic, filled with steep, breathtaking peaks that resembled swords aimed straight up at the heavens. Deep within the mountain range was an imposing, antiquated fortress. The fortress had been constructed in a very unique style that incorporated all types of sword designs into every aspect of its construction, including its roof and all of its walls. Large swords, small swords, short swords, long swords. Countless swords of all descriptions filled every single corner of the ancient fortress. The fortress was brightly lit, and there were many people walking or flying back and forth through it. All of these people were dressed in golden robes, with a Sheng character embroidered onto the sleeve, and it appeared to be quite a formidable cultivating clan. Inside a dim secret chamber deep within the fortress was a black stone platform that was around 10 feet in size, upon which laid a young man. The man's eyes were tightly shut, and he was completely still and lifeless. On the stone platform around the body were engraved a circle of profound spirit patterns, while a dark azure oil lamp had been placed above the man's head. However, at this moment, the flame in the lamp was very feeble, and it was constantly flickering, looking as if it could be snuffed out at any moment. Adhered to the front of the man's chest was a black talisman with a series of profound runes inscribed upon it, and it was giving off a burst of special aura fluctuations. All of a sudden, The door of the secret chamber creaked open to punctuate the silence, and two figures made their way into the room one after another. The first figure was an elderly man with a head of white hair, but his face was extremely supple and completely devoid of wrinkles, presenting a rather jarring contrast to behold. Behind the elderly man was a strange-looking middle-aged man with a dark green complexion and a pair of eyes with tiny black pupils. The two of them made their way over to the stone platform before turning their attention to the black talisman. "Today's the day," the white-haired elderly man suddenly asked. "It is. My divination tells me that it's today," the green-faced man replied as he pulled out an azure abacus-like object, and the beads on it were occasionally sliding back and forth on their own. "Shanner possesses the best aptitude out of everyone of his generation in our clan, but unfortunately, he's had an upbringing as he hails from a side branch of our clan, resulting in a very cold and arrogant personality. He's refused to accept any assistance from our clan and insists on forging his own path. Hopefully, following this ordeal, he can set aside all of his stubborn nature and realize what's truly important," the white-haired elderly man sighed. The green-faced man nodded in response, and he was just about to say something when he suddenly raised an eyebrow and exclaimed, "It's coming." As soon as his voice trailed off, the black talisman on the young man's chest suddenly ignited on its own, erupting into a ball of black flames. All of the patterns on the stone platform around the body also began to glow with radiant black light, forming a black halo that encompassed the entire body. The white-haired elderly man immediately flicked a finger through the air upon seeing this, releasing a streak of black light that vanished into the black flame in front of the body. The flame instantly reared up, then split up into 5 parts, immediately following which several streaks of black light flew out of the 5 balls of fire, then connected together with one another to form a pentagram formation. Fierce gusts of yin wind instantly began to sweep through the secret chamber, and the air temperature plummeted. But the white-haired elderly man and the green-faced man paid no heed to this, as they stared intently at the pentagram formation. The space at the center of the formation suddenly began to warp, and a black shadow appeared, squirming and writhing as if it were a living creature. The shadow squirmed around for a while, then abruptly split open to reveal a spatial rift. In the next instant, a ball of golden light flew out of the spatial rift, then vanished into the young man's body in a flash. Some time later, the body began to radiate dazzling golden light. The white-haired elderly man's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this, and he swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of white light that enveloped the young man's body. The complexion of the young man's pale and lifeless face quickly reverted back to normal, and his heart also began to beat again as the vitality was restored to his body. The azure lamp above the young man's head had also suddenly become several times brighter, and its flame had become extremely stable. Some more time passed, and the young man's eyelids fluttered slightly before slowly peeling back to reveal a pair of dazed and disoriented eyes. It took a long while for those glazed-over eyes to focus, and the young man began to look around in bewilderment, upon which he quickly spotted the 2 people beside him. "Uncle Clan Leader." His expression instantly changed drastically as he tried to sit up, only for the white-haired elderly man to press a hand down onto his shoulder as he said, "Lay still, Shanner. The soul transference technique has only just been completed, so you can't move yet." The young man opened his mouth to say something, but ultimately remained silent and laid back down. "What's going on, Clan Leader? I should already be dead by now. Why have I returned to the clan?" the young man asked. "You have your uncle here to thank. A long time ago, he gleaned through divination that you were going to face a tribulation of life and death at some point, but he couldn't determine when this tribulation was going to befall you. Hence, when you decided to leave the clan, he secretly planted a soul transference secret technique onto your nascent soul, which ensured that if your nascent soul were to ever sustain lethal damage, it would automatically be teleported back to our clan so that you can possess another body, the white-haired elderly man explained. The young man was silent for a moment, then turned to the green-faced man as he said, "I see. Thank you, uncle. If it wasn't for you, I would already be dead by now." "There's no need to thank me. Don't forget that you and I are related by blood," the green-faced man replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. A complex look flashed through the young man's eyes as he said, "Uncle, every time you use your divination technique, you lose at least 10,000 years of your cultivation base. In order to glean my fate, you had to have lost at least 100,000 years of cultivation base. How can I repay you? A mere 100,000 years worth of cultivation base is nothing. I'm just glad you're back safe and sound," the green-faced man said with a smile. The young man lowered his gaze and remained silent. "What kind of enemy did you encounter in the northern glacial Immortal region, Shanner? There's no way any ordinary cultivator could have struck you down," the white-haired elderly man suddenly asked. A cold gleam flashed through the young man's eyes upon hearing this, but he refrained from answering the question. "Forget it. If you don't want to tell me, then I won't pry any further. You can take care of this matter on your own," the white-haired elderly man said with a shake of his head. "Thank you, clan leader," the young man replied with a nod. "Now that you're back, stay here for now. We'll help you recover your cultivation base as quickly as possible, and the Immortal Palace has already sent us several summons, so you should go and accept your post there. As for everything else, we can discuss all of that some other time," the white-haired elderly man said. The young man's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and he was silent for a moment before nodding in response. The white-haired elderly man and the green-faced man exchanged a glance upon seeing this, and both of them could see their own elation mirrored in one another's eyes. Ali. In the sky above a red plain, two balls of radiant light, one red and one golden, were engaged in a ferocious battle. The two balls of light were clashing violently amid a string of earth-shattering booms, causing the surrounding space to tremble as gusts of fierce wind swept through the air in all directions. Occasionally, a streak of light or two would spill down from above, smash giant craters into the ground, while also sending vast clouds of red dust erupting into the air. One of the combatants in the battle was none other than the silver-robed woman by the name of Kling, and she was standing atop the back of the mountainous golden beetle, which was radiating dazzling golden light. She was facing a group of 7 or 8 figures, all of whom were dressed in red robes with extremely lifelike fire raven designs embroidered onto them. These were none other than the true flame sect cultivators, but Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai were nowhere to be seen among them. All of the true flame sect cultivators were looking rather worse for wear. In particular, the 3 golden immortals among them seemed to all be carrying injuries. The trio was led by Su Yangzi, and they had instructed all of the true flame sect cultivators to form a flame-shaped formation. Hovering above each of them was a large red flag with scorching flames burning upon them, and bursts of fire were erupting out of the 8 flags toward Kling and the golden beetle. The fire was giving off scorching heat that caused the very space in its wake to tremble and warp, but Kling wasn't taking this battle seriously at all. Instead, she was casually standing on the golden beetle's back while fiddling with a green gourd in her hand, paying no heed to the ongoing battle at all. Meanwhile, the golden beetle swept its 2 front legs through the air, releasing streaks of translucent light, each of which was around 10 feet in length. The streaks of light came as thick and fast as rain to clash against the crimson flames, and a violent explosion rang out as the streaks of light and scorching flames dissipated in unison, with neither side able to get the better of the other. Kling, There's no bad blood between you and our true flame sect, so why have you suddenly attacked us?" Su Yangzi roared in a furious voice. "All of us have ventured into the infernal frost immortal manor in order to search for treasures, but as you can see, I'm all on my own, and there's only so much that I can do by myself. Hence, prior to entering the immortal manor, I planted some marks on all of you in secret. That way, all I have to do is let you go off on your own for a while, then hunt you all down, and all of the treasures that you've found will be mine. Isn't that a much better strategy than going around searching for treasures on my own?" Kling replied with a wide smile. Su Yangzi and the others were even more enraged to hear this, but at the same time, they were also extremely alarmed as they hurriedly inspected themselves with their spiritual sense. A mocking sneer appeared on Kling's face as she swept a sleeve through the air, and an enormous azure silkworm that was several 100 feet in length emerged on one side of her, while a pristine white python of a similar stature appeared on the other side. Both of the massive creatures immediately pounced at Su Yangzi and the others as soon as they appeared. The azure silkworm had quite a bloated appearance, but it was quite a bit faster than the giant white python, and it reached the true flame sect cultivators in the blink of an eye before opening its mouth to release a dense mass of azure silk, forming a massive net as it swooped through the air. These azure silk threads were glittering and translucent, and they were also giving off faint law power fluctuations. Su Yangzi and the others were all quite alarmed to see this, and Su Yangzi hurriedly yelled, "Adopt the golden crow formation." Immediately thereafter, he began to make a rapid string of hand seals while opening his mouth to expel a ball of blood essence into the large flag above his head. The spirit patterns on the surface of the flag instantly began to glow radiantly while turning a golden color, and a pillar of golden fire erupted forth from within. Everyone else immediately did the same thing, and the flags above their heads also took on a golden hue while releasing pillars of golden flames. The 8 fiery pillars fused as one in the sky above, transforming into a golden bird that was over 1,000 feet in size. The bird had a phoenix comb on its head and a set of long and fiery tail feathers. What was most remarkable about it was that it had 3 legs, and it spread its enormous wings before swooping toward the oncoming azure net. As soon as the azure net came into contact with the golden bird, the former instantly erupted into flames and was quickly incinerated into ashes. Kling raised an eyebrow upon seeing this. Meanwhile, the giant white python had also arrived near the true flame sect cultivators, and it opened its mouth up wide before releasing a thick pillar of translucent white light. As soon as the pillar of white light emerged, it instantly shattered in silence into a cloud of white mist that was interspersed with white ice spikes that swept toward the true flame sect cultivators from all directions. The cloud of white mist was giving off bone-chilling glacial chi, and it seemed that even the nearby space had been frozen solid. Meanwhile, the giant azure silkworm screeched in annoyance at having its attack foiled, and it opened its mouth once again to release a stream of countless silk threads that flew through the air like a volley of arrows. At the same time, Kling's golden beetle steed was also contributing to the attack, and it swept its 2 front legs viciously through the air to release 2 streaks of translucent light, each of which was over 1,000 feet in length. In the blink of an eye, the 2 streaks of translucent light appeared in front of the true flame sect cultivators, before sweeping toward them in a crisscross arrangement. The collective power of these 3 beasts was extremely formidable, and an alarmed look flashed through Su Yangzi's eyes as he hurriedly made a rapid string of hand seals, while everyone else was also looking on with grim expressions. As the 8 flags began to glow more and more radiantly, the flame around the golden bird's body also became brighter and brighter. In the boundless sand sea, the azure flying boat continued onward at a steady pace. After flying for close to half a day, Han Li and Lu Yuking had already traveled a considerable distance into the boundless sand sea, and at this point, both of them were looking a little flushed. Han Li was clearly faring much better, but Lu Yuking's cheeks were bright red, and she was giving off an unnatural aura of heat. Han Li was standing at the bow of the boat, using his spirit eyes to scour the surroundings when he suddenly turned to the left. There on the horizon was a faint spot of green, and it seemed that there was an oasis over there. "That must be one of the mirages that this place holds," Lu Yuking said. A hint of intrigue appeared in Han Li's eyes upon hearing this. "These mirages are very difficult to deal with, but we'll have to go there if we want to ascertain our current location. However, I'm not very well versed when it comes to dispelling illusions, so I'll be counting on you, Brother Han," Lu Yuking said. Han Li nodded in response in an ambiguous fashion, and the azure flying boat beneath his feet accelerated significantly at his behest as it sped toward the oasis. Ali. The battle was continuing to rage on above the red plain. A string of earth-shattering booms was ringing out incessantly, causing the nearby space and the ground down below to tremble violently. All of the true flame sect cultivators were frantically making hand seals, and aside from the 3 golden immortals among them, all of the other cultivators were looking very pale. The flags hovering above their heads had already taken on a bright golden hue, and the runes on their surfaces were surging incessantly. The golden crow was nowhere to be seen, and it had been replaced by a sea of golden fire that was several thousand feet in size. The sea of golden flames was keeping all of the attacks from the 3 formidable beasts at bay, and an impasse had ensued. "Looks like I underestimated all of you. Then again, you must have some tricks up your sleeve if you're going to enter the infernal frost immortal manor. In any case, this is a perfect opportunity to test out the power of this thing," Kaling said with a smile, then tossed the green gourd in her hand forward. At the same time, a burst of silver light surged out of her mouth, then vanished into the gourd in a flash. The gourd instantly shuddered before radiating dazzling green light, and it also swelled drastically in size to over 100 feet in length. The entire gourd looked as if it had been fashioned out of exquisite green jade, and its surface was riddled with profound patterns. All of a sudden, the gourd began to tremble, and countless tadpole-like spirit runes emerged on its surface, radiating blinding silver light. At the same time, a burst of tremendous law fluctuations surged out of the gourd in all directions, causing the surrounding space to tremble violently. "That's an essential, immortal treasure." The hearts of all of the true flame sect cultivators instantly sank upon seeing this. At the moment, they were completely tied down by the attacks being unleashed by the trio of formidable beasts, and there was simply nothing more that they could do. A serious look appeared on Kaling's face for the first time in the battle, and she made a rapid string of hand seals while releasing several balls of silver light out of her mouth in succession, all of which vanished into the giant green gourd in a flash. The green light radiating from the gourd instantly became even brighter, while the silver spirit runes on its surface began to writhe and squirm incessantly as if they were living creatures. All of a sudden, a burst of green light erupted out of the opening of the gourd, then swept directly toward Su Yangzi and the others. A green ring then emerged within the stream of green light, giving off a burst of indescribable law fluctuations. The nearby space instantly collapsed, while all of the world's origin chi within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers was swept up into a frenzy. Countless balls of 5-colored light emerged in the air, then converged toward the green ring before vanishing into it, causing it to swell further in size, while the law power fluctuations it was giving off became even more immense. The stream of green light struck the sea of golden fire in a flash, then pierced straight through it with ease before arriving directly above the heads of the true flame sect cultivators. In the blink of an eye, the The streak of green light swallowed up the 8 flags suspended above the heads of the true flame sect cultivators, and the green ring within it abruptly expanded to encompass the 8 flags. The golden flames burning over the 8 flags were instantly snuffed out, following which the flags rapidly shrank down significantly in size. The expressions of all of the true flame sect cultivators instantly changed drastically upon seeing this. Just now, their spiritual connection with the 8 flags had suddenly been severed. A pleased look appeared on Kling's face upon seeing this, and she cast an incantation seal into the air, upon which the streak of green light surged back into the giant green gourd, bringing the 8 flags along with it. Su Yangzi and the others were completely flabbergasted to see this. Without the support of the 8 flags, the sea of golden fire in front of them exploded violently into a vast expanse of fire before quickly fading away. And with that, there was no longer anything standing in the way of the attacks of the 3 formidable beasts. Countless azure silken threads swept through the air, ensnaring all of the true flame sect cultivators before they had a chance to react. Immediately thereafter, 2 thick streaks of translucent light emerged from the nearby space before sweeping toward them like lightning, instantly slicing the bodies of all of the ensnared true flame sect cultivators in half. At the same time, a cloud of glacial mist containing countless ice spikes arrived, releasing such formidable glacial chi that a white mountain of ice that was several kilometers in diameter appeared out of thin air, encapsulating all of the true flame sect cultivators within it. All of the true flame sect cultivators had already perished at this point, with the exception of the 3 golden immortals, but even they were completely immobilized and only just barely clinging to life. Kling gave a pleased nod upon seeing this, following which her brows suddenly furrowed slightly as her complexion paled noticeably. The green gourd was extremely powerful, but she still hadn't refined it yet, so she had to expend an enormous amount of immortal spiritual power to use it. She took a deep breath, and her complexion quickly returned to normal as she swept a sleeve toward the giant green gourd above her head. In the blink of an eye, the gourd reverted back to its original size before returning to her grasp. After that, she turned to the true flame sect cultivators encased in the mountain of ice with a cold expression. Yet before she had a chance to do anything, a layer of crimson flames suddenly emerged over the bodies of the 3 golden immortals. The 3 bursts of crimson fire quickly joined together to release a burst of astonishing power, and the giant mountain of ice shuddered as a large crack appeared on its surface. The giant white python let loose a furious roar upon seeing this, but it was already too late for it to do anything. All of a sudden, 3 streaks of crimson light shot out of the crack like lightning before racing away into the distance, and 3 nascent souls could be seen within the streaks of light. A large plume of azure silken threads shot forth, sweeping toward the 3 nascent souls at an astonishing speed, but they were clearly still too slow to catch the nascent souls. "Why are you running all of a sudden?" Kling chuckled as she casually flicked a finger through the air, releasing a streak of silver light that shot forth like lightning before vanishing into thin air. In the next instant, it reappeared directly above the 3 nascent souls, revealing itself to be a small silver vial. A burst of silver light surged out of the opening of the vial, instantly enveloping the 3 nascent souls, and the nearby space instantly became extremely heavy. It was as if the 3 nascent souls had flown into a swamp, and they were barely able to move at all. A vicious look appeared on the face of Su Yangzi's nascent soul as it opened its mouth to release a tiny crimson dagger, which came slashing down upon its own head like lightning. The nascent soul was instantly sliced into 2, and one half of it was instantly set alight, transforming into a tiny fiery figure with countless crimson runes dancing within it. The fiery figure reached out with both hands to grab onto the surrounding silver light, then brought its hands apart violently, tearing a gash into the silver light. The other half of Su Yangzi's nascent soul immediately flew out through the opening, following which the tiny red blade shattered, disintegrating into a ball of crimson light that enveloped this half of its nascent. As a result, the nascent soul's speed was instantly increased by severalfold, and it vanished into the distant sky in the blink of an eye. A hint of surprise flashed through Gling's eyes upon seeing this, and it was already too late for her to try and intervene. However, she paid no heed to this as she pointed a finger at the small silver vial, and it instantly sucked in the other two nascent souls. Meanwhile, the mountain of ice shattered, and the giant white python carried the storage tools of all of the true flame sect cultivators to Gling on its head. Gling inspected the contents of the storage tools briefly with his spiritual sense, then gave a pleased nod before stowing them away, following which she patted the giant python on the head as she praised, "Well done today." A fawning look instantly appeared in the giant python's eyes as it bobbed its head at Gling, then transformed into a streak of white light that flew into a small white pouch strapped to her waist. The huge azure silkworm also flew over to her, before vanishing into another pouch that she was carrying as a streak of azure light. In the next instant, Gling flew onto the back of the golden beetle, and it asked her in a rather tender voice, "Should we keep going? You are the fastest of the three, yet both of the other two intervened to intercept the escaping nascent souls, so why didn't you do anything?" Gling asked as a cold look flashed through her eyes. "With your powers, if you really wanted to intercept those nascent souls, you could have done so with ease without my help," the golden beetle scoffed in response. "Don't think that you can just keep getting away with blatant disobedience like this. I'm only pampering you because you have decent potential, but don't mistake my kindness for weakness," Gling scolded in a cold voice. The golden beetle merely buzzed in response, paying no heed to her thinly veiled threat. A hint of anger flashed through Gling's eyes, but she was unexpectedly tolerant of the golden beetle, and she quickly suppressed her anger as she instructed, "Keep going." The golden beetle didn't say anything else, either, and it continued onward as a streak of golden light. Gling sat down onto its back, then cast her gaze toward the green gourd in her hand. A burst of azure light flashed from the opening of the gourd at her behest, and the 8 crimson flags flew out before landing in her grasp, upon which a hint of excitement appeared on her face. "What's the big deal?" "It's just some crappy gourd," the golden beetle scoffed. "This is no ordinary gourd. All profound heavenly treasures are born from heaven and earth and contain unmatched power. They are true, essential, immortal treasures, and this gourd has already been growing here for countless years. The law powers nurtured within it are the most fundamental secret of this realm, and it's certainly going to be even more formidable than the average profound heavenly treasure. I still haven't even refined it yet, and it's already displaying such immense power. Once I have a chance to refine and examine it further, it'll be sure to serve me even better." Gling's voice sounded quite calm and collected, but there was definitely an underlying hint of excitement. "I didn't know this gourd was that impressive. How remarkable," the golden beetle chuckled. "In any case, I really made the right decision to come here. With this profound heavenly treasure in my possession, the high zenith pill will surely be mine. Once I reach the high zenith stage and master this treasure, there's a chance I could even ascend to the great encompassment stage in the future. As long as you pledge your absolute loyalty to me, I'll be sure to treat you well," Gling said in an excited voice. "I'll be thanking you in advance then," the golden beetle replied in an indifferent manner, seemingly unimpressed. Gling's brows furrowed slightly with displeasure, and she harumphed coldly, "What an ungrateful little rascal you are." She then paid no further heed to the golden beetle, as she continued to examine the green gourd in her hand. All of a sudden, her expression changed slightly as her gaze fell upon the opening of the gourd. The gourd was entirely green in color, as if it had been carved out of a chunk of jade. But the coloration around the gourd's opening was clearly a little light, indicating that it hadn't completely matured yet. Looks like I harvested it too early, and it's still quite some years away from reaching full maturity. In any case, once I leave this place, I can find some suitable spirit soil and spirit liquid to nurture it, and 1,000,000 years should be enough for it to mature. She had found this green gourd in a medicine garden, and she had been ecstatic to stumble upon it. She knew that it hadn't completely matured, but after some consideration, she still decided to harvest it right away. She knew that harvesting the gourd prior to full maturity was definitely going to have some type of negative impact upon it, but she certainly wasn't going to wait for the next emergence of the immortal manner. Who knew if the gourd would still be there waiting for her next time? Ali. In the sky above a crimson mountain, the vast flow palace cultivators were flying through the air. They were arranged in a line, collectively forming a long streak of blue light that resembled a giant dragon as they raced through the air. The crimson mountain down below was filled with lush vegetation, among which there was no lack of spirit plants that were giving immense spiritual power fluctuations. Some of the true immortal cultivators of the vast flow palace were clearly tempted to make a detour to scoop up some of the spirit plants below. But Luo Qinghai showed no intention of stopping as he continued onward without pause. As a result, no one else could stop to search for treasures, and the fair-skinned scholar beside Luo Qinghai said, "I don't think we need to be in such a hurry, Palace Master. Some of the spirit plants down below are quite useful, even to the likes of ourselves." "Trust me, Junior Marshal Brother, I have my reasons for doing this," Luo Qinghai replied. The fair-skinned scholar faltered slightly upon hearing this, then nodded in response before falling silent. Ali. Meanwhile, the cultivators of the northern glacial Immortal Palace were currently standing in front of a blue palace. The palace was shimmering with spiritual light, and there were clearly many precious treasures inside. All of the northern glacial Immortal Palace cultivators were looking at the palace with intense longing in their eyes, while Zhao Jinhen had his hands clasped behind his back as he declared in an indifferent voice, "You can go in, but you only have 15 minutes. Once the 15 minutes are up, we set off right away." All of the northern glacial Immortal Palace cultivators immediately gave affirmative responses before flying inside, while Zhao Jinhen remained at the entrance of the palace, looking into the distance with a contemplative look in his eyes. Ali. Within a gray cloud, a gray flying boat was racing through the air. Bursts of black light were flashing within the gray cloud like arcs of black lightning, but all of it was kept at bay by a light barrier around the flying boat. The Dawn Fall sect cultivators were seated in the cabin of the boat, with Feng Tiandu situated at the center, while everyone else was arranged around him in a circular formation. Hints of gray light were emanating from their bodies, and it seemed that they were using some type of secret technique. A long while later, Feng Tiandu's eyes suddenly sprang open, while his brows furrowed tightly. "How could this be? I can't detect the auras of those two origin separation law chains at all now. Where could he have gone?" he murmured to himself with a contemplative look on his face. Ali. Elsewhere in the immortal manor, a ball of crimson light was flying through a vast sea of clouds in the sky at an extraordinary speed. The ball of light contained none other than Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai, and both of them wore serious expressions as they flew along in silence. Ali. In the sky above a swamp, the group of southern dawn beings had been surrounded by a flock of strange yellow birds. These birds were around 40 to 50 feet in length, with green fleshy lumps on their heads and extremely sharp beaks and talons. Individually, they weren't particularly powerful, but there were hundreds of them, and they were as fast as lightning. The southern dawn beings were far more powerful than these birds, but they were still trapped here, unable to make any progress. Ali. At this point, everyone had already been in the infernal frost immortal manner for quite some time, and many people had already reaped significant rewards or fallen to their demise. In the boundless sand sea, the azure flying boat continued to race through the air, while Han Li stood at the bow of the boat, scouring his surroundings with his bright-sight spirit eyes. Lu Yuking was standing beside him, holding the jade slip that contained the map of the area. Their unhealthy red complexions had already faded, and it was clear that they had already found a water spirit area that had allowed them to alleviate their fire poisoning. Even though they would be slowly poisoned again after leaving the water spirit area, as long as they planned out a good route that would allow them to make regular stops at water spirit areas along the way, there shouldn't be any problems. Hence, the fire poison that the boundless sand sea was extremely notorious for didn't actually pose much of a threat to them. At this point, the two of them had already ventured quite deep into the boundless sand sea, and they weren't far away from the pathway leading to the other region. All of a sudden, Han Li's attention was drawn to his right, where there seemed to be another oasis on the distant horizon. Lu Yuking had also noticed the oasis up ahead, and she said, "This is already the 83rd mirage, Brother Han. From this point, we have to begin traveling in the northeastern direction." Han Li immediately summoned his mantra-treasured axis upon hearing this. The Eye of Truth appeared at the center of the axis at his behest. Faint golden light was radiating from the eye as it cast its gaze forward, and immediately thereafter, the azure flying boat changed direction slightly, flying in the northeastern direction of the oasis. Even though Han Li had changed directions, the oasis still appeared directly up ahead, and it began to expand on the horizon as the flying boat continued onward. Han Li made no attempt to try and avoid the oasis, instead flying the spirit boat straight into it. The surrounding scene suddenly changed as the barren and desolate desert gave way to a lush oasis that was filled with dense greenery and lakes. The air had also become very moist, while the heat completely faded, and it was as if they had arrived in a cool and refreshing world, one that was in stark contrast with the environment that they had just been in. However, the surrounding oasis was constantly spinning, making one feel very dizzy and disoriented. Han Li's expression remained calm and collected, and it seemed that he was already accustomed to this. He continued to make a string of hand seals as he inspected his surroundings through his Eye of Truth. While Lu Yuking had already closed her eyes and sat down with her legs crossed, channeling her cultivation arts to protect her mind. The azure flying boat continued onward in a very stable fashion, completely unaffected by the changes in the surrounding environment. After flying for around 15 minutes, the surrounding oasis suddenly fell away layer upon layer like a series of popped bubbles, and the environment reverted back to that of the parched desert. Han Li displayed no reaction to this whatsoever, and he continued to look straight ahead while guiding the azure flying boat onward. "I didn't think that these mirages would be so unavoidable. Thank heavens you're here, Brother Han. Otherwise, even if I had the map and knew the correct route, it would have been impossible for me to get to the destination," Lu Yuking said with a smile as she slowly opened her eyes. Han Li merely gave a faint smile upon hearing this. "We're already not far away from that passageway, but according to what I've heard, the passageway is guarded by a golden immortal stage demon beast, so it won't be easy to bypass," Lu Yuking continued. "Do you know what type of demon beast it is?" Han Li asked as he raised an eyebrow. "No, all I've heard is that it's quite formidable, and that it's already been guarding that passageway for countless years," Lu Yuking replied with a shake of her head. "I see. In that case, I suppose we'll just have to adapt according to the situation," Han Li said with a contemplative nod. Han Li's calm and confident demeanor instilled within Lu Yuking a great deal of reassurance. Close to a day passed by in the blink of an eye, and they encountered several more mirages during that time, all of which were smoothly negotiated by Han Li using his eye of truth. According to Lu Yuking's map, the passageway wasn't very far up ahead. At this moment, the flying boat was still flying onward, but Han Li's brows had become slightly furrowed. He was no longer concerned about the mirages in the boundless sand sea, and the only thing that was weighing on his mind was the demon beast that was guarding the passageway. If the demon beast really had already been guarding the passageway for countless years, as Lu Yuking proclaimed, then who knew if it had managed to develop some special abilities during that time? Right at this moment, another oasis appeared up ahead, and Han Li hurriedly rid himself of his train of thought so he could focus on the task at hand. Lu Yuking examined her map momentarily, then said, "This is the final mirage before the entrance of the passageway. There's no need to change directions, just fly straight ahead." Han Li nodded in response, and he summoned his Eye of Truth once again as the azure flying boat continued directly forward. Right as it was about to fly into the oasis up ahead, 4 more oases suddenly appeared consecutively up ahead. The 5 oases formed a pentagon, with each one resonating with one another, and all of them began to glow bright in unison, transforming into an enormous ball of green light in the blink of an eye. Han Li and Lu Yuking were both quite taken aback to see this, but at this point, it was already too late to try and stop the flying boat. The azure flying boat vanished into the ball of green light in a flash, and the surrounding desert vanished once again. However, on this occasion, instead of appearing in an oasis, Han Li and Lu Yuking found themselves in a chaotic space with countless glowing green shadows, flashing, pulsing, and intertwining with one another, presenting a very disorienting sight to behold. At the same time, bursts of formidable illusory force surged forth from all directions, and the illusion here was countless times more potent than the oases that they had previously encountered. "How could this be?" Lu Yuking exclaimed with a stunned expression. As soon as her voice trailed off, a burst of formidable illusory power descended upon her, and her eyes instantly became dazed and glazed over as she stood completely rooted to the spot, seemingly having already fallen under the control of the illusion here. The same type of illusory power was surging toward Han Li as well, and he was naturally far better equipped to handle it than Lu Yuking, but even so, he was still struck by a rush of dizziness. He took a deep breath as he hurriedly channeled his spirit refinement technique, and a cool and refreshing sensation instantly surged through his mind to erase the fog of dizziness. Right at this moment, Lu Yuking suddenly began flailing her arms and legs erratically through the air, as a hint of insanity appeared in her eyes. Immediately thereafter, she turned to Han Li with fierce killing intent in her eyes, and a silver longsword appeared in her grasp amid a flash of silver light. The sword was radiating extremely bright and pure silver swordlight in the form of countless threads of silver light, and it was pierced directly at Han Li at an astonishing speed. Even before the sword arrived, a burst of extremely formidable sword intent had already descended upon Han Li, making him feel as if there were countless red-hot needles piercing into his soul. Even with his formidable spiritual sense, he still couldn't help but give a muffled groan, and he couldn't help but feel stunned by this unexpected turn of events. On the way here, he had never seen Lu Yuking use a sword before, so it was a huge surprise to him that her mastery of the sword was already so advanced that she could already harm the souls of her opponents with her sword intent alone. However, her sword intent was still nowhere near powerful enough to inflict any substantial damage upon him, and he immediately flicked his fingers through the air, releasing 5 streaks of azure sword chi that intercepted the oncoming silver longsword before threatening to tear it apart. However, to his surprise, the silver longsword suddenly sprang up like an agile fish, even though it had already left Lu Yuking's grasp, and it was able to struggle free from the 5 opposing streaks of sword chi. At the same time, radiant azure light erupted out of Lu Yuking's body as she abruptly vanished from the spot. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this, and in the next instant, 5 identical Lu Yukings appeared all around him, every single one of which was giving off formidable sword chi. The silver longswords being wielded by the 5 Lu Yukings lit up once again before being thrust directly at him, with each one aimed at one of his vital regions. A film of starlight appeared over Han Li's body to keep the 5 silver longswords at bay, and at the same time, Han Li swept his gaze across the 5 Lu Yukings through his eye of truth, upon which a look of realization instantly appeared on his face. Immediately thereafter, he opened his mouth to release a thick arc of golden lightning, which hurtled toward one of the Lu Yukings on his right at an incredible speed. That Lu Yuking instantly slashed her sword through the air, conjuring up a dense silver sword barrier around her entire body. The arc of golden lightning struck the sword barrier, and a burst of loud crackling instantly rang out as close to half of the lightning was eradicated by the countless opposing sword projections. However, the silver sword barrier was also trembling unsteadily, and it didn't take long before it completely exploded, while the silver longsword in Lu Yuking's hand was also shattered into countless silver pieces. What little remained of the arc of golden lightning struck Lu Yuking with tremendous force, and she was instantly sent flying through the air like a rag doll before crashing into the side of the flying boat, upon which the other 4 Lu Yukings around Han Li vanished without a trace. The only remaining Lu Yuking gave a muffled groan before springing to her feet. The killing intent in her eyes hadn't abated in the slightest, yet before she had a chance to do anything, a thick translucent chain emerged out of thin air around her, then wound itself around her body like lightning. The chain was glowing faintly, and it had a rather insubstantial form. It was a chain formed by Han L's spiritual sense, and even though it had rendered Lu Yuking completely immobilized, the insane look on her face remained, and she continued to struggle with all her might. Han Li quickly began to chant an incantation while flicking a finger through the air, releasing several incantation seals in rapid succession, all of which vanished into Lu Yuking's body one after another. Countless runes instantly emerged from Lu Yuking's body, then transformed into several translucent rings that constricted around her. The protective azure light around her body instantly melted away like snow under the scorching sun, and she slumped to the ground in an unconscious state. Han Li gave a pleased nod upon seeing this. This was a secret technique that he had invented by emulating the restrictive law powers within the 7 bright star rings, and evidently it had worked quite well. After successfully subduing Lu Yuking, a perplexed look appeared on his face. The silver longsword that she had been using earlier was extremely mediocre. In fact, it couldn't even be considered to be a spirit treasure, and if it weren't for that, perhaps he would still be struggling to restrain her. The power that she had just displayed had been far more formidable than what she had revealed prior to this point, and Han Li couldn't help but wonder if she had been hiding her true power this entire time. He took a long look at the unconscious Lu Yuking, then quickly withdrew his gaze. At this moment, he was still in quite a perilous situation himself, so he didn't have time to ponder the true nature of Lu Yuking's powers. With that in mind, the true extreme film around him faded, and he sat down with his legs crossed as he peered into the surrounding chaotic space. This was quite a formidable illusion, but he could tell that fundamentally, it was no different from the oasis illusions that they had encountered prior to this. With the experience that he had accumulated in breaking through those illusions, he was confident that he could break out of this one as well. With that in mind, he immediately began to chant an incantation, and all of the immortal spiritual power was channeled into the mantra treasured axis in front of him. The axis immediately began to radiate dazzling golden light, and in particular, the eye of truth at its center had become extremely bright and translucent. Han Li took a deep breath, then swept a sleeve toward the eye of truth, releasing a burst of golden light that vanished into the eye of truth in a flash. The eye of truth instantly lit up even further, following which countless threads of golden light shot out from within. These threads of golden light were extraordinarily fast, instantly spreading throughout the entire surrounding illusory space. Han Li closed his eyes while making a rapid string of hand seals, and the eye of truth instantly began to flash, while the threads of golden light also began to tremble, inspecting everything within the illusory space like countless sensitive feelers. Close to an hour passed by in the blink of an eye, and this entire time, Han Li remained seated with his legs crossed in a completely still manner. Right at this moment, a faint thud suddenly rang out somewhere within the illusory space, and a burst of golden light suddenly erupted out of one of the threads of golden light. The space near that thread of light shuddered as ripples surged through the surrounding area, and Han Li's eyes instantly sprang open as he turned to that direction while flicking his fingers rapidly through the air. At the same time, an enormous burst of spiritual sense surged out of his glabella, and a burst of silver light flashed near that patch of rippling space, following which 8 or 9 spiritual sense chains emerged there in unison. All of the spiritual sense chains had sharp tips that pierced into the rippling space, and a burst of dazzling green light instantly erupted out of that area, then twisted and warped erratically before forming an extremely faint rift. Han Li's eyes instantly lit up upon seeing this, and the flying boat beneath him sped up drastically at his behest, transforming into a blurry green shadow that vanished into the rift in the blink of an eye. The illusory space around Han Li instantly vanished, and the flying boat reappeared in the boundless sand sea before continuing onward without pause. Only then did he heave an internal sigh of relief. That illusion had been far more formidable than the previous ones, and even he had almost fallen prey to it. Meanwhile, Yuking has also returned to a sound frame of mind, and she was no longer struggling as she laid completely still on the ground, seemingly having fallen unconscious. Han Li turned his gaze to her with a hesitant look on his face. After a brief moment of contemplation, he seemed to have arrived at a decision, and he released an incantation seal, upon which the spiritual sense chain around Yuking slowly faded away. At the same time, the translucent rings of light around her also vanished, following which Han Li flicked a finger through the air to send a streak of azure light flying into her glabella. She immediately gave a muffled groan, and her long eyelashes fluttered slightly as she slowly opened her eyes. She was still looking a little disoriented, but at the very least, the deranged look in her eyes had faded. After taking a moment to collect herself, her expression abruptly changed drastically as she hurriedly sat up before looking around with a panicked expression. Only after realizing that she was safe on Han Li's flying boat did her expression ease slightly, but there was still a hint of lingering fear in her eyes as she said, "It looks like you've already managed to get through that illusion, Brother Han. I didn't think that the final mirage would be so formidable." Han Li had been observing Yuking's expression this entire time, and he remained silent as his brows furrowed slightly. Yuking had naturally noticed the changes in his expression, and she asked, "What is it, Brother Han?" Han Li shook his head as he replied, "Nothing. How are you feeling right now?" Yuking faltered slightly upon hearing this, then pressed her hand over her own abdomen as a hint of pain and surprise appeared in her eyes. "How did I sustain these injuries? Back in the mirage, you fell prey to the illusion and suddenly attacked me, so I had no choice but to subdue you by force, and I was a little too forceful in the heat of the moment," Han Li explained. Yuking faltered slightly upon hearing this, following which an apologetic look appeared on her face as she said, "I'm sorry for always being a hindrance to you, Brother Han." Han Li waved a dismissive hand in response, then cast his gaze forward as he said, "Now that we've bypassed the final mirage, the passageway should be just up ahead. Let's take a short break before we continue onward." He swept a sleeve through the air to cast an incantation seal as he spoke, and the azure light radiating from the flying boat instantly rippled slightly as it drew to a halt. Lu Yuking nodded in response, then sat back down with her legs crossed before taking a pill. A layer of bright azure light quickly appeared around her, forming an azure light barrier that encompassed her entire body. A hint of befuddlement flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. It didn't seem like Lu Yuking was putting on an act, so could it be that she had already completely forgotten what had happened in that final mirage? After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li shook his head to rid himself of that train of thought, but at the same time, he made a mental note to be on his guard. With a sweep of his sleeve, numerous streaks of blue light were released, each of which contained a formation flag that landed somewhere near the flying boat. The formation flags were radiating bright blue light, forming a thick blue light barrier that encompassed the entire azure flying boat. After setting up the formation, Han Li flipped a hand over to produce a crimson pill. The pill was enshrouded in a layer of dense crimson light, and it was giving off astonishing spiritual power fluctuations. This was none other than one of the vast heaven pills that had been given to him by Worm 3. In order to break that final mirage, he had expended a great deal of immortal spiritual power, and he was going to have to face a golden, immortal stage demon beast up ahead, so he had to replenish his own immortal spiritual power reserves as quickly as possible. After taking the pill, Han Li sat down with his legs crossed, then channeled his cultivation arts to digest the pill, and a layer of red light quickly appeared over his face. Ali. In the sky above a black desert in the infernal frost immortal manor, a green jade flying carriage was hurtling through the air. This place was none other than the black rock desert that Han Li and Lu Yuking had just passed through, and there was a tall man standing on the flying carriage, holding a white disc treasure with a speck of red light flashing upon its surface. All of a sudden, the man raised his head and cast his gaze forward as he mused in a cold voice. "I knew there was a spirit refinement technique practitioner nearby. You're not getting away from me." Immediately thereafter, the four wheels of the flying carriage transformed into four miniature azure tornadoes at his behest, and the speed of the flying carriage was instantly enhanced by severalfold as it shot through the air at an incredible pace. Ali. An hour passed by in the blink of an eye. On the azure flying carriage, Han Li opened his eyes, having already completely replenished his immortal spiritual power reserves. A short while later, the azure light around Lu Yuking also faded, and she appeared to have recovered from her injuries as well. "Let's go," Han Li declared, then swept a sleeve through the air to withdraw the formation around the flying boat before continuing onward. Both of them remained silent, and before long they had already been flying for close to 3 hours. This was supposed to be the deepest part of the boundless sand sea, but the scorching heat in the air was gradually diminishing, and a slightly chilly aura had emerged in its stead. All of a sudden, Han Li's pupils contracted slightly as he swept a sleeve through the air, and the azure flying boat instantly drew to a halt. As it turned out, another oasis had appeared up ahead. This oasis appeared to be around 40 to 50 kilometers in radius, and it was covered in lush greenery. At the center of the oasis was a crescent-shaped lake, the surface of which was glowing radiantly. Even though it was a bright and sunny day, the lake was still extremely eye-catching, resembling a radiant moon that had fallen upon the boundless sand sea. Unlike the oases that had come before it, this one was not a mirage. At the center of the crescent-shaped lake was a rapidly revolving black vortex that was several dozen feet in size. Bursts of spatial fluctuations were emanating out of the black vortex, and there was a faint speck of white light deep within it, seemingly leading to another world. All of the water in the lake around the vortex had been stirred up and was splashing audibly. "That's the spatial passageway," Yuking exclaimed in an ecstatic voice. However, Han Li wasn't looking at the black vortex. Instead, his gaze was focused on a small forest beside the lake, and his expression suddenly changed slightly as he swept a sleeve through the air to stow the azure flying boat away, then descended toward the oasis down below. Yuking faltered slightly upon seeing this, then immediately followed along out of habit. As they drew closer to the oasis, a surprised look suddenly appeared on Yuking's face as she stopped in her tracks. As it turned out, there was a demon beast that was over 100 feet in size laying in the forest down below. The greenery in the forest was quite dense, and the demon beast had been concealed within the undergrowth, so Yuking had failed to spot it prior to this. The beast resembled a giant ox, and it had an extremely intimidating physique, with bands of bulging muscles beneath a layer of azure jade-like fur. However, as opposed to hooves, it had 4 sets of sharp talons that were giving off a cold gleam. Even in death, the beast was still giving off a very formidable aura, so it had to have been an extremely powerful being. However, it had been decapitated, and its huge head was laying on the ground not far away. There was a single black horn on its head, and there was a horrified look in its eyes, as if it had witnessed something extremely terrifying right before it met its demise. "It looks like someone already got here before us. That makes sense. All of the major powers who entered the Immortal Manor on this occasion are aware that there's a passageway leading to another region deep in this boundless sand sea. They may not have a map of this place, but given their powers, it's certainly not impossible for them to find this place before us," Yuking mused. Han Li nodded in response, and a grim look appeared on his face as his gaze fell upon the wound on the demon beast's neck. The cross-section of the wound was very smooth and even, indicating that the beast had been decapitated by a single blow. Furthermore, no signs of battle could be seen in the nearby oasis, indicating that it had been slain by a single attack before it even had a chance to retaliate. Only an extremely formidable cultivator could have dealt with a golden, immortal stage demon beast so easily. Han Li landed beside the body of the huge demon beast, then brushed a hand over the wound on its neck, picking up some of its blood before taking a sniff, upon which his eyes immediately lit up. Yuking was rather taken aback by Han Li's strange gesture, and she couldn't help but ask, "Is there something wrong, Brother Han?" "No," Han Li replied with a shake of his head, while a burst of azure light flashed over his hand to remove the blood there. "In any case, now that the beast has already been killed, we won't have to go through the effort of trying to get past it. Let's go." Yuking naturally had no objections to this, and the two of them flew over to the black vortex before peering inside. "There doesn't seem to be any danger," Han Li concluded after a brief assessment, and with that, the two of them flew into the black passageway. Han Li felt his vision blur for a moment, and in the next instant, he was already in a completely new environment. After taking a brief moment to gather his bearings, he inspected his surroundings to find that the terrain was quite flat, and he was situated in a red and barren area that was completely devoid of vegetation and living creatures. Yuking was situated not far away from him, and at this moment, she was also gradually returning to her senses. A whirlwind swept past not far in front of them, raising a cloud of red dust into the air, and there was a primordial aura permeating throughout the entire area. Han Li slowly swept his gaze over his surroundings, and his brows suddenly furrowed slightly. Just now, he had attempted to release his spiritual sense to scout the surrounding area, but he discovered that there was a type of restrictive force around his body that wasn't impeding his movements at all, but rendered him completely unable to release his spiritual sense out of his body at all. Just how big is this infernal frost immortal manor, and why are there so many strange things in this place? Han Li couldn't help but sigh in a slightly exasperated voice. In contrast, Lu Yuking wasn't very surprised by this, and she smiled as she said, "When I was a child, I once read an ancient scripture from my father's study. According to that scripture, the northern glacial immortal realm was formerly known as the infernal frost immortal region, but for some unknown reason, its name was later changed. If this infernal frost immortal manor has something to do with the former name of the immortal region, then it's no wonder that it's such a massive and complex place." Han Li was just about to respond when his expression suddenly stiffened slightly, and he was suddenly rooted to the spot with his mouth slightly agape. Lu Yuking was quite startled to see this, and she hurriedly asked, "Are you all right, brother Han?" Han Li was silent for a moment longer, then replied in an ambiguous manner, "I'm fine, I just suddenly recalled some things." Lu Yuking wasn't entirely convinced, but she didn't ask any further questions. Han Li's gaze drifted over the surrounding area before settling on a certain direction deep within this barren land, and his brows furrowed ever so slightly. What had actually cut him off earlier wasn't any thought that had suddenly popped into his mind. Instead, it was his mantra-treasured axis. For some reason, as soon as he cast his gaze toward that direction, the time Tao runes on his mantra-treasured axis would begin to flash, as if it could sense the presence of time law powers there. "Which way should we go next, brother Han? It looks like our spiritual sense isn't going to help us here," Lu Yuking said. Han Li hesitated momentarily, then pointed in the direction that his mantra-treasured axis was responding to as he replied, "Let's go in this direction first." "Sure," Lu Yuking replied with a nod. Thus, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to summon that azure spirit boat, and after both he and Lu Yuking had flown onto the flying boat, it sped away as a streak of azure light. As they flew through the air, the sound of the howling wind instantly grew louder, and Han Li stood atop the flying boat as he continued to scour the barren land down below. Looking down from above, he discovered that the terrain here wasn't as flat and level as it had first appeared. Instead, some hills could be seen down below, but they were far too small to be considered anywhere near mountains. The further they went, the more complex the terrain down below became. Aside from those small hills, a series of plains and ravines of different sizes and depths had also begun to appear on the landscape. The ravines seemed to have been carved out by flowing water, but any bodies of water here had long since run dry. After flying for a few minutes, Han Li suddenly raised an eyebrow as he spotted a set of ruins that appeared to have once been a city on the distant horizon. And the flying boat instantly accelerated in that direction at his behest. Upon reaching the edge of the set of ruins, the azure flying boat descended in front of a moat that was over 100 feet wide. However, the moat was also completely dry, and the parched and fractured earth at the bottom of the moat indicated that it had also been dry for a very long time. Han Li and Lu Yuking cast their eyes forward to find that the city wall across from the moat was still relatively intact, but it had clearly been severely ravaged by all types of weapons, and it was quite remarkable that it was still standing. The two of them made their way toward the city over a nearby stone bridge, and upon reaching the center of the bridge, Han Li suddenly spotted a piece of bone jutting out of the bottom of the dried moat down below. It appeared to be the curved horn of some type of demon beast, and it was roughly as thick as a grown man's arm. Han Li stopped in his tracks as he swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light, which instantly raised that entire section of the ground down below to reveal a complete skeleton. A hint of surprise instantly appeared on Lu Yuking's face as she caught sight of the full skeleton, and Han Li was also quite taken aback by what he was seeing. The skeleton was very strange in appearance, and it was impossible to identify what type of demon beast it had once belonged to. However, one thing that was certain was that it had definitely belonged to an enormous creature that wasn't inferior in size to the giant mountain ape. The piece of bone that Han Li had presumed was a horn was actually just a section of one of the creature's teeth. "Do you recognize this beast, Brother Han?" Lu Yuking asked with a puzzled expression. "No aura of the beast remains at all, and I can't identify it based on its skeleton alone," Han Li replied with a shake of his head. While it was true that he didn't know what this beast was, it occurred to him that the skeleton looked as if it could belong to one of the beasts that he had seen on that mural in the hall near the spirit medicine garden from before. Given that the mural depicted a battle, Han Li couldn't help but wonder if the battle depicted on the mural had taken place at this very place. However, as soon as this possibility occurred to him, he immediately realized that this couldn't be true. The battle depicted on the mural had been one of a massive scale, and if it had truly taken place here, then this city would have definitely been completely razed to the ground. After crossing the stone bridge, Han Li and Lu Yuking arrived at the city gates to find a large plaque hanging overhead, bearing the words Moon Lake City. After passing through the city gate, a disturbance suddenly arose in Han Li's heart, and he couldn't help but stop in his tracks again. The dozen or so active time Tao runes on the mantra-treasured axis in his body were flashing incessantly, and they were reacting even more urgently than before. Han L's brows furrowed slightly as he cast his gaze into the city to find that it had already been reduced to complete ruins. There were collapsed buildings everywhere, and some demon beast and human remains could be seen protruding out of the piles of rubble, but they were nothing more than bones. Han Li and Lu Yuking made their way down the main road deeper into the city, and it was more of the same, with more rubble and collapsed buildings littering the landscape. Only as they reached the core area of the city did they spot a golden palace that was over 1,000 feet tall in the distance. Compared with all of the other buildings that they had seen on the way here, this golden palace was exceptionally well preserved, with only some cracks on its walls and a slightly collapsed roof. Aside from that, the palace was glowing with dazzling golden radiance, as if there were a golden membrane over its surface that was reflecting the light of the sun. Han Li was just about to approach the palace when he felt a burst of heat flash through his storage bracelet. His brows furrowed slightly as he stopped in his tracks once again, then flipped a hand over to produce a glowing green jade box. A faint crack rang out as he opened the jade box to reveal a gray eyeball inside. The eyeball looked as if it had been carved out of stone, and waves of faint gray light were constantly emanating from it. "What's this?" Lu Yuking asked with an intrigued expression. "It's the eye of a primordial fey beast," Han Li replied in a concise manner. Lu Yuking could tell that Han Li didn't want to elaborate on the matter, so she didn't ask any further questions. Han Li examined the eye of the primordial fey beast for a moment to find that all that it was doing was releasing faint waves of gray light. He was unable to tell what was happening, so he could only hold it in the palm of his hand as he continued to approach the golden palace. Upon reaching around 1,000 feet away from the golden palace, Han Li's eyes suddenly narrowed slightly as he grabbed onto Lu Yuking's arm, then dragged her behind a collapsed wall for cover. As it turned out, there was a silver-robed woman standing at the foot of the gate of the golden palace. She was making a hand seal with one hand and holding a damaged drigug in the other while casting a series of incantation seals toward the palace gates. Lu Yuking took a glance at the silver-robed woman over the collapsed wall, then exclaimed, "Why is she here?" Han Li hurriedly raised a finger to his own lips to make a silencing gesture. Even though there was a spiritual sense restriction here, The silver-robed woman was clearly a very formidable golden immortal cultivator, and they could be overheard if they weren't careful. The woman was none other than Qiu Ling, and the drigug that she was holding was riddled with antiquated runes. Rays of golden light were emanating from its surface, and they were connected to a peculiar circular design on the gates of the Golden Palace, seemingly undoing the restriction on the gates. Han Li could sense clear time law fluctuations emanating from both the drigug in Ling's hand and the Golden Palace gates, and his brows were tightly furrowed as he carefully peered over the collapsed wall. Only then did he notice that there was a strange figure next to her. Even though it was resting on its haunches, the creature was still standing at 70 to 80 feet tall, and at first glance, it resembled a yellow wall. Only upon closer inspection would one be able to notice the peculiar spirit patterns all over its body. The creature had its back facing Han Li, so he wasn't able to see what it looked like, but it reminded him very much of the primordial fey beast that he had slain all those years ago. This creature was far smaller in stature than that primordial fey beast, but the outline of its body, the coloration of its skin, and those peculiar spirit patterns were all virtually identical to that of the primordial fey beast. A perplexed look appeared on Han Li's face, and he took a glance down at the eyeball that he was holding. Right at this moment, the faint white light that was emanating from the eye suddenly brightened significantly, resembling a beacon that had suddenly lit up in the night. The strange creature that was resting on its haunches next to Ling instantly sprang to its feet, then turned around to reveal a hideous face with a flat nose, a massive mouth, and a huge single eye situated at the center of its head. Sure enough, this was just a miniature primordial fey beast. The primordial fey beast let loose a thunderous roar as a thick pillar of white light shot out of its eye, hurtling directly toward Han Li and Lu Yuking. An alarmed look appeared on Han Li's face as he grabbed onto Lu Yuking's wrist, then sprang up into the air to evade the pillar of white light before descending onto the main path leading to the Golden Palace. As a result, the two of them were completely exposed.